Okay, so let's share the screen and get to work. Okay. So here we go. So welcome for the 10th Shiur out of 16, Bosor. And we're not going to finish Siman Tzadik base today. We're going to be working on Sifim Hevav and Zion. So this is the union of Tipus Cholov. You have to remember the whole Tzadik base in 2 words, the Tipus Cholov. You have Bosor falling into Cholov, you have Cholov falling into Bosor. That was Sif Aleph and base. And then we had in Gimel Dalet, Chatichanas and Avela, the Bosor B'Cholov, and the big Machlekas, Chatichanas and Avela B'Shari Surim, which was last week's Shiur. And we changed a little bit direction. We're still talking about Tipus Cholov now, but now we're speaking more about Kalim. If you remember, I believe I showed you this this diagram here about the overview of the whole Hilchas Bosor B'Cholov. So you have in general, you can divide it sort of into 3 sections, so to speak. In Sim Pei Zayin, we gave all the clothing, what's Savashal, what's Gedi, what's Imei. And then we spoke about different mixtures, about the chashash of mixing with Peiches, if you have on the same table, and then mixing in your mouth or digestive system, Peites, about the waiting period. We didn't learn Siman Tzadik, but the Kachal, but the udder of the cow is also regarding the mixture. The udder itself is fleshik and it has milk inside. So that is also inyan of mixture of mamoshes. Then Tzadik Aleph was Bosor B'Cholov Shnis Arvu, and we spoke about Malicha and Tatogavar and so on, different ways when they touch cold, when they touch hot, when one of them is hot, and so on. That was Tzadik Aleph. And then when Tzadik Beis, you have Mamish Bosor B'Cholov mixing together in a pot. So Aleph, the Bosor fell into the Cholov, and then there's a Beis, the Cholov fell into the Bosor, the Chaticha, outside the Reitiv, inside the Reitiv, half inside the Reitiv. So Chaticha Nas and Avela. And then Tzadik Gimel starts with Kalim. About Blias, we know we have a klal tam ke'ikir, that the taste of a food is like the food itself. So we're talking normally about the taste absorbed in a keli. So you have a fleish kapat. How did it become a fleish kapat? It absorbed tam basar. So that is really Tzadik Gimel is about a kadeir shabishla babas leivashal b'cholov. And we'll be getting into Mirza Hashem next week. And then the din of a kaf is in Tzadik Dalid, when you stick a spoon, kaf chaleves, b'kadeir shel basar. And then you have Tzadik Hey, that, let's say, a fish was cooked in a fleshka keli, you want to put that to eat it with gvina. It's not parnat, Tzadik Hey. Then you have in Tzadik Vav is the Michael Charef, that what's with even if it's cold, if you're cutting a knife, using a knife to cut something sharp. Tzadik Zion is a different din. You're not allowed to make milchig bread, but in general, we start inside the Gimel with the din of Kalim. But let the truth be told that it really starts with the Reisha. So I just made this because this has worked well in the diagram, but it's not really true, because we're going to start shifting gears right now with the Reisha. We already start this third section, if you want to call it that, of what's with Kalim. We're going to be dealing now not with Tipus Cholov that fell into the Bosor. We're going to be dealing with a Tipus Cholov that fell onto a Kadeira, fell onto the Keli. And then what's the din with the Keli? Okay, so that's today's. Okay, these are just, I put together some one word summaries of the different things over here. Fine. Okay, so the way I decided to do this is to start with the Gemara. To show why it is that this is such a murky area. And although they're going to be svaras from the various poskim, the Shainim and the Achreinim, the poskim, about why it is we want to look at it in a particular way, The first thing is, why is there such a big suffix about this? Where does the suffix come from, and what are we mesupik about? And as we'll see, we're even mesupik what the suffix is about sometimes. But let's start off with the most basic understanding. This is the Gemara in Zvachim of all places. Zvachim, Tav Tzadik Vav. And it's talking about Korbanos. A very interesting discussion. The Gemara, the two Amoraim discussing, is it better to learn something al Pisvara, or better to learn it from Braisis? You have a clear din in the Braisa, but then you have a Svara. Then what's going to happen if you have a clear Braisa that goes against your Svara? All the very fascinating discussion over here, but it ends up reflecting itself in our din. So boy mine. So the question was asked, Bishul b'miktzas keli. If you cooked, now we're talking about cooking korbanos now. So you cooked, and normally we're talking, sometimes there were metal kelim, which could be kasher. Then you have in klicheres, says in Chumash, then you have to break it because you can't get the taste out of a klicheres totally. So what happens if you have to kasher something which was used for the korbanos? So boy mine bishul b'miktzas kli. You have in the korbanos in the base of mikdash, and they only cooked with part of the pot. They only filled up the pot halfway. So the lashon for kashering, we call it hagolos kelim, but they called it meriko shtifa. The whole discussion not important for our context here. So they asked the question: bishul b'miktzas kli ton meriko shtifa or ain't ton? Do you have to kasher the whole keli, or is it enough to kasher the half a keli? So you have a pot, and you cooked in it a half way up to the top. So now when it comes time to do merika shtifa, do you have to do only up to the bottom half, or do you have to do the whole keli? So it's a very interesting question, because we say tam ke'ikah, so we're accustomed you have to kasher keli. What's a shaila? Well, let's think about it a second. If the blia was only from the food into the keli, so then what happens? Then it gets absorbed, the tam gets absorbed from the food into the keli, and then what? It travels north to the top of the keli. Is that really true? And it's with only cheshish to it? Does it really happen? Just mention parenthetically, why would we need to kasher a keli? So in general, all of the korbanos that were cooked, you leave them for too long, it becomes nesar. So the tam also comes nesar, so you have to get that tam out. You could also have a carbon, you have psulim mikdashim, that's something that you found out later became puzzle, a treifa, puzzle for something else. You have different reasons you'd have to get the tam out of the keli. So the Gemara is asking the question, by the korbanos, miktzas keli, do you have to cash the whole thing or not? The whole discussion with svaras back and forth, svaras, brises, and then it brings a brisa that says as follows: Bishul b'miktzas hakli, ton mriku shtifa kol hakli. End it. No, we got a brisa. End of story. So this is in the context that the Gemara is talking about the necessity of learning the Mishnayos and the brises and so on, because you can have a svara that say that you don't need to do the entire keli, but here you have a clear brisa that says you do have to do the whole keli. Okay, so the one that was into svaras, he said, "Amalei Tanya Tanya." It says a brisa, and I guess that's the end of my svaras. The brisa says you have to kasher the whole keli, merika shtifa kol. Yeah, but then the Gemara, if the Gemara would end here, although we cannot always learn and extrapolate from kodshim, from the laws of the sacrifices to the dinim of kashrus, but certainly many cases we do. We have all different dinim that are learned lagabra korbanos. The whole lineage of hetera bala, that we distinguish between when something absorbed the heter and something absorbed the iser, is derived taka from this din of neisar, because when the taste was absorbed, it's in the Gemara Veda Zara, and then the Veda Zara talks about Hagalos Kelim, and it learns it out from the korbanos. So in many cases we do learn from korbanos. So if this would be the case, and this would sort of be the end of the story, it's a shut and closed case, that you have to kasher the entire keli, and then the hezber would be that even if you only cooked in the bottom half, evidently we see from this brisa that the taste travels all the way up to the top of the keli too, goes all the way through the keli. But he answers differently. He says, Tanya, it says a brisa taka. But time amai, but what's the explanation of this din? Amar kra, in beklei nechashus bushola, Yeah, it says in bekleb necheshes pushola. In other words, if it was cooked in a keli, it's not important what is necheshes or another metal, but if it was cooked in a keli, it doesn't say anything about it. We learn from the pasuk, I feel a mitzvah's kli. The kli, even a part of the keli. So even if it was mitzvah's kli, you have to do meriko shtif on the entire keli. And that's where now the entire situation becomes unclear. Why is that? Because if we learn from a pasuk, the svaras going back and forth in the Gemara were about hazah. When you have to sprinkle, let's say you want to sprinkle paraduma on it, or you have hazah. There are different cases where you need hazah. So you have to sprinkle something on it. Do you have to cover the whole thing with the hazah? No, you have even a little bit that's good enough and affects the entire thing. Now, that's clearly a din in karbonis. That doesn't apply necessarily to our case mitzad svara. So now that we learn out that the explanation, according to the Maskana of Gemara, is that the reason you have to kasher the whole keli is because of a pasuk. So wait a second, if it's a pasuk, maybe the pasuk only talks about karbonis. So when it comes, we now have a clear brisa that if it's karbonis and it was cooked only in part of the keli, you have to kasher the whole keli. But maybe that's because it's a pasuk that says by karbonis and it doesn't apply to all other cases. Or on the other hand, maybe it does apply to all other cases. That is the source of the suffix. Okay, that's why the Rishonim are not sure what is the din when you have some part of a keli that became not kosher. And in our case, as you can see on top, chalav shenishbach al sir mibachutz. You have a fleishik keli, and now the milk spilled on the outside of the keli. Yeah. So the Marami Rothenberg and the Smack, they learn out that it's only clear by kodshim. I will be surim nisher safek im tipum papas lagamre. But by other isurim, and in our case, Bosor b'cholav, it's a doubt whether it'll go all the way through the keli or not. By kodshim, we say it goes through all the entire keli. Maybe that's a chumrah by kodshim. But the Marami Motamig and the Smack are not sure. What are they not sure about? So the ways in which they're not sure we're going to talk about. And it'll be reflected in the Shulchan Aruch and the Poskim. The Smag, by the way, just to get chronologically sort of what's going on over here, the Smag is Sefer Mitzvahs HaGodel. The Smack was later the Sefer Mitzvahs Kotten. As a Kishmei Kain Hu, we understand that the Smack is smaller than the Smag. In fact, to a certain extent, the Smack is a kitzur of the Smag. Anyway, the Smag was from the great Baal Teisves, put together all a list of all the Tariq mitzvahs of all the different shittas, and the Maram Rothenberg was the teacher of the Rosh, the Mordechai, and the Gos Maimonides, and the Sharedura. We've come across him many times. Okay, so before going through the dinim, I thought it would be useful that first let's think about what could be the case. So klal number one, we know that when something falls on the outside of the keli, just like when you cook the food inside the keli, the taste of the food goes into the walls of the keli. Okay, how far does it go? Let's say there's a fleshik pot. It's fleshik only the inside of the pot, the fleshik, or it's fleshik the outside of the pot is also fleshik. It goes all the way through. It goes all the way through. We assume it goes all the way through. Okay? Maybe that's only an assumption. Maybe that itself is only an assumption, but we assume it goes all the way through. What's with the cover? The cover is also fleshik. Yeah. Now, what exactly happens over here? So let's say the bottom half, you made a pot of fleshik, cholent or something over here, and you filled it up to here. Okay, so what's happening, let's say, with the cover? So we know that certainly there's a blia, there's absorption from the flesh into this part of the pot, that's for sure. What's with this part of the pot? It's empty. We're not 100% sure. We'll talk about it in a minute. Okay, what's with the kisui? So the kisui, this chance is giving off boiling water and steam, all different things are going up over there. So that's how this becomes fleshik. Certainly the side is not any less than that, or maybe it is because heat rises and this is going to all the way straight to the top. And maybe it's not going so much to the sides. So how did this sides over here become fleshik? Is it because of the steam, just like the cover became fleshik? Or is it because you got the taste creeping up inside the wall from the bottom to the top that it became fleshik? Okay, so you might think, who cares? It's fleshik. But now, since a tipas challah falls on the outside, so now we want to know what happens to that tipas challah. Okay, does the tipas challah fall straight in? Let's say the tipas challah falls on the cover. Say the tipas challah falls over here. Say the tipas challah falls over here. Where does it go? Where does it travel? So the Smag says we can learn straight from the Gemara, and he saw them just like Kodshim. So we see over there that if it was on the bottom, you have to kasher the whole thing. Marika shtifa. It's a pasuk. Okay, so we can learn from that pasuk for Shadi Surim also. So the Smag holds basically that if a tipas challah falls over here on the outside, it asks the entire pot. Why does it ask the entire pot? Maybe we could do bittul. Let's say it's one little drop. It's going to ask the entire pot. So the way the Mefarshim and Mefarish, the Smag, like what's the explanation of this? He says this following: if the drop of milk fell into the pot, so then it gets evenly distributed in the pot, and then all the, let's say it's a pot of meat, and you have 60 ounces of meat, and you have 1 ounce of milk. So the 1 ounce of milk gets equally distributed among the 60 ounces of meat, and then it's batal b'shishim. He says, but the tam inside the keli can't be mitzdaref, says the Smag, because that's the way the Mefarshim explain this. One of the explanations of the Smag, that it's enough that the milk can go there. So it's like a one-way street. So the milk will go into the entire keli, okay, and it will answer the keli because you cannot use, wherever it travels, it'll make Bosor b'chalav there. Because you have tam Bosor throughout the whole keli, says the Smag. And then as the milk travels, this becomes Bosor b'chalav, and this becomes Bosor b'chalav. If it's going to spread through the pot, eventually you'll have bittul b'shishim. He said, no, you can't take that, the tam on the other side of the pot. You can't. We say tam ke'eker. And this is always the balancing act in the principle tam ke'eker. On the one hand, we treat the taste of the food like the food itself, and all aser midiraisa. I mean, the whole machlekes, you learn tarubas, but the Beker didn't. We hold the tam ke'eker midiraisa. All different shittas brought the prima godim. In general, we hold tam ke'eker midiraisa. But on the other hand, somebody has potatoes cooked in a fleshika pot that was just used an hour ago, but the pot was clean. You don't have to wait 6 hours afterwards. Tam ke'eker. So it's fleshik, but it doesn't mean you have to wait 6 hours. Sometimes it's like the thing itself. Sometimes it's not like this thing itself. So anyway, so the Smag says, yeah, it'll travel in order to answer it, but you cannot take all that taste from the whole pot in order to be mavatal it. Now, let's say the drop falls over here on the side where it's empty. Okay, so what's going to happen? Does the drop just sit there? It's a hot pot. Does it start traveling? Okay, and does it travel only in its local area and remains locally contained? Or maybe it'll gradually make its way around the entire pot. And what about going over here? Does this act as a sort of boundary, the actual food itself? And the svara would be that since right now it's being cooked, so the walls are now actively being filled and being pumped in, so to speak, with the food that's being cooked. So now you got to get into the walls from the top. But we're busy, we're absorbing food. You're just tam. You're tam. We're not going to absorb you now. We're busy absorbing mamish from the food itself. So is the milk going to have a kayach to go down over there? Maybe not. And what happens if it falls directly opposite here? Do we say that since this is actively in movement, then it looks like it goes straight in and it falls straight in? What exactly is happening over here? So we have many sfeikis. And this is, we're going to see the different shittas, and we're going to have really Sif Hey and Vav and Zion are all talking about this, basically the same idea, is what is the din in these cases, and specifically the difference between the top and the bottom. First, in Sif Hey, he'll give the halacha, and then Sif Vav, Mechaber, is going to give the minig, and then Sif Zion, he's going to say, what do we do b'shas hadchak? That's a general overview of what we're learning today. And let's now jump into it. Okay. So here we got Chalav shenishpach. So now we got 4 different shittas here. As I mentioned, the smag says finished. The pot is usher because this milk is going to travel through the whole pot, and it will travel and interact with the existing fleisha katam throughout the entire pot, the top and the bottom, and become basa b'chalav. And now once the pot is basa b'chalav, it's going to aser a tafshel inside too, because now you're cooking kosher food inside a non-kosher pot. So according to the smag, everything becomes aser. We do not paskan like the smag, but that's what the smag says. Rabbi Rothenberg has a very interesting shit. Rabbi Rothenberg says that it's going to spread out how far. It'll spread out how far can this milk impact. Okay, so if you take 60 times the amount of the milk and you say that that became aser, okay, it can aser up to shishim. Finished. That's how much you could do. If you really want to be technical, it's not 60, it's 59.9. It's got to be a little less than shishim. But whatever the case is, so let's round it off to shishim. The Shach wants to get into the decimals, but generally we'll say like this: we got tipas challah fell on the side. There's a pretty healthy tip over here. Anyway, tipas challah fell inside of the pot, and it's going to aster 60 times. And now you're going to have basa b'chalav 60 times. So now this basa b'chalav, which is 60 times, could become batel and shishim. So if you have shishim times shishim of the drop, which is 3,600, 60 times 60 is 3,600. So then the Maram Rothenberg said, then it's okay. If you have 60 times 60, and you can count the pot and you can count the tafshel itself. 3,600 times sounds like a lot. Bittul b'shishim is one thing, but bittul 3,600 sounds like a lot. So just to bring it down a little bit into Elam Hazeh, when you have an eyedropper, when you're giving the children Tylenol or something, get an eyedropper and it tells you how many drops to give. A drop is a measure. It's a measure. We don't usually use it, especially in large amounts. Okay, but it says you can, theoretically speaking, the number of drops in the ocean is too many for us to count. Okay, but it's a finite number, the number of drops in the ocean. Okay, it keeps changing. It'll rain, it'll evaporate, but there's a certain number of drops in the ocean. So if you look in all of the Sifra Cheshbon, when they figure these things out, 1 milliliter is 2 drops. 1 milliliter, 2 drops. So if you want to make the Cheshbon, excuse me, 20 drops is 1 milliliter. I said 2. 20 drops is 1 milliliter. Fine. So it turns out that in order to have bittul, according to the Maram Rothenberg, okay, if 1 drop fell in the pot, it's a very small 1 drop. 1 drop fell in the pot, then you need 183 ml, which is a little over 6 ounces, a little over 6 fluid ounces, not so much. You have twice a revis is enough to be mavatal. So we're not talking about.
So every ounce is 10 drops?
No. A half a milliliter is 10 drops, but we need 3,600 drops.
Can you include the food
Would end
inside?
up being, 600 drops to 1 ounce approximately, something like that. Anyway, I'm not going to make the whole cheshbon, but just by the way, how often does a tipas challah fall in the food anyway? So just to bring it a little down to Elam Hazeh in terms of practical cases that happen, and also this inyan of a drop, and if something spills, I mean, it spilled a drop, like from an eyedropper, like what kind of business is that? When did that ever happen? So just to bring it closer, so when you have people that have burners close to each other, a fleishiga burner, a milchiga burner, even if not, sometimes there could be a keli which is on the counter. You have a keli which is on the counter, and then somebody's frying. So let's say somebody's frying something with oil in a fleishiga ben yeme. I know we didn't talk yet about but we're going to speak a little bit about yeme today with Ramah. Okay, but basically, in order for something really to be fleishik, it had to be used for fleishik within the last 24 hours. Then the taste is still fresh. We say tam ke'ikr, something within the last 24 hours. So then even if it wasn't a hamburger that you were frying, yeah, okay, we can make it a hamburger also. But even if it wasn't a hamburger, somebody's frying, I don't know, frying an egg, frying potatoes, whatever it is they're frying, and oil, when you heat it up, sometimes it splatters. And it does happen that sometimes somebody looks and there's a keli on the counter, whether it's a parva keli or it's a milcha keli, what it is, and they see that some oil splattered on it. Okay, and sometimes it's like a drop. So in any case, so this is something which, does happen in real life. So the Maram Rothenberg says, yes, it spreads out through the keli, but it can only answer so far. It will only answer up to shishim. So then if you have shishim times the shishim, then it's going to be okay. He says it'll be a 3660 because the Shach says it's really not 60 times 60 because we have to make a correction. We need a little bit more in order to be mavatalit because it's going to be shishim and it's going to be asr. You need a little bit more. The 59.9. Anyway, it's not a printing mistake here. 3660 is the way it would come out according to the Shach. You have to add an ounce for each one of the shishim. Anyway, not important. So around, it's important. Everything in Torah is important, but as far as close union is concerned, it's not so significant. We first have to get the shittas that are shame. The third opinion is that of the smak. And the smak says it depends where the tipa fell. Did the tipa fall neged hareitiv on the other side where there's food, or did the tipa fall in the empty area shaleka neged hareitiv on the area that's empty? Totally a for nafla tipa. Where did this drop fall? And this is going to be especially important for us. Das hasmak for a very simple reason. Because Shulchan Aruch passes like the smak. Chaber passing like the smak. So we're going to have the main erichas today is going to be the das hasmak. But the Maram Rothenberg is going to have some honorable mention, and so to the fourth shita. We have a shita the Torah brings down to the Bechil bin Parish. And here now is the whole problem of Bechol Leif and have tafshel shishim neged acholav tafshel mutter. It doesn't matter where it fell. The tafshel is going to be mutter if you have 60 times in the tafshel more than the cholav, then it's going to be mutter. And that's going to be Siv Zayin b'shas hadchak about relying on this kula about the Bechil mi Parish that it can be bottled b'shishim under all circumstances. But in order to properly understand them, we have to go through Sif Hey and Vav, and then Mir Hashem will get to Zayin. Questions before we go further?
According to the first three shittas, can the food in the pot also be considered, or it's just the size of the pots?
In general, we're talking about the, according to the smag, then it doesn't matter. It's mainly the pot, and then the pot's can answer the food. But both the Maram Rothenberg and the smak take into account the food, but the smak is going to differentiate between if it's negarative, shalaika negarative. That we'll see.
They do take consideration the food inside?
When it falls negarative.
Uh-huh.
If it's not negarative, a different story. That we'll see. We have all the riches over here. I'm just giving this as a general overview to be able to understand what it is going on. And just another thing which I will point out is that after we finish figuring out what to do with the food, we have to figure out what to do with the pot. Not only that, sometimes we'll have a problem with the pot and not with the food. The food's going to be okay and the pot's not going to be okay. Then we have to figure out how to get the food out of the pot without making the food treif. But anyway, we're going to get to all that soon. Okay, so that's the Psak Shulchan Aruch is like the smak that we differentiate whether it fell negarative or shalaika negarative. So now let's get into das smak. Ready to go? Ready or not? Here we come. So first of all, what I hope to do today, just the overview, is to go through in general the main dinim of Hey, Vav, and Zayin, and then do the Ramah, especially the Ramah and Sif Zayin is quite long, quite lengthy. Let's do that, the Ramah, put some of the Ramah before the Ramah directly commenting on the Shulchan Aruch we'll do first, and we'll try to finish that by the break, and then after the break we'll do the Ramah. Mir Hashem. Okay. So what does the smak say? So then, so it fell in over here. So basically, what the smak says, it's as if it fell straight into the tafshil. It seems that the tafshil has this kayach to be mamshech. How and why is a whole discussion. But the fact that it's actively cooking and it fell negara tafshil is as if it fell into the tafshil. Okay, and I will mention parenthetically because it's a whole ariches, and we need next week's shiur even to talk about it at all. But just a very common situation in factories is that you have jacketed kettles. That industrial food production is very often done with steam kettles, which means there's a keli made out of stainless steel, and then it has a jacket. You have it's like a keli within a keli. You have another keli surrounding that keli. So inside the first keli goes the food. Between the two walls goes steam, which circulates around and around in order to cook the food on the inside. So what happens when that steam becomes treif? First of all, let's go step number one. Let's say somebody cooked food inside the kettle, okay? So then they use steam. So the whole din of steam will have in sif ches, very important sif. All the sifim are important, okay? But then we have the taste going into the steam. So then if people come in when they're kashing, they don't know what they're doing. So they empty out the keli and they clean the keli and they leave it for 24 hours, ain't a ben yemei, and then they put in fresh water and they boil it up. Yeah, but they're boiling it up with the treif of steam. Then people say, yeah, but it's on the other side of the wall. So according to what we just learned, being on the other side of the wall helps you. No, what do you say? Tipas chalav is also outside the pot. It's a problem.
What's
Yes.
the smack?
Sure, it's
It's
a problem. Sure,
it's usually on the
According
bottom
to
of the pot.
Shulchan Aruch, it's like it fell in. I mean, I say somebody's making some hot chocolate, and they have a pot of milk that's cooking over there, and along comes, the kid brother, and he decides, he wants to make himself a hamburger, and he doesn't want to make any kalim dirty. He takes the hamburger and he smacks it up against the side of the outside of the hot chocolate. What are you gonna say? It didn't fall into the milk, it's on the outside. Yeah, but once it gets hot, you see over here, according to the smack, it's like it fell in, if it was negative. Okay, so that's the end of the smack. The explanation of this is going to be the Shachantaz have nuances to explain what exactly is going on over here. But bottom line, the tafshil is going to be mutter if you have shishim, because like it fell inside. However, let's say it didn't fall negative, fell in the empty parts, and that's a different story. We are going to treat this area as treif, because we don't have what to be mavatal with. And therefore, we're going to treat the makam arek as if it's treif. And if you want to get out the food, you're going to have to wait till the food cools off. That is Siv Hey. And when it comes Siv Vav, the Machaber says, V'minig lesser b'chol eif. Even though technically the food, according to the smack, is kosher, it's no problem, it's mutter. And the only problem is the pot. So how the poskim speak about making a hole in the bottom of the pot. Just shows you about, people say, there's inflation, food becomes more expensive. Yeah. So I guess the pots were cheap, they're always talking about fixing, you have a blecher. They always used to fix the pots. Your pot gets a hole in it. So what do? You go to the metal worker and he takes some solder, or he uses the walls itself and he closes the hole again. So you have to get the food out. What do? Make a hole in the bottom. What's the big deal? Yeah, the Hashem tiktzer, make a hole in the bottom of the pot and drain it out. The poskim say it's no good. Why is it no good? Because we're afraid in the process of making a hole in the pot, basically we're worried that this entire gray area all the way up, and this is all suffix now, it's because of our suffix. We're afraid that this is spreading through the makam arek and answering it, because the pot itself tam ke'ikir. It has fleishik tam, because we're worried what it says over in the Gemara about kachim also applies to shari surim. So therefore, the whole pot, even if it never ever was it used for cooking fleishiks, that gray area over there. But since we're worried that the taste of the meat went from the bottom up to the top, and now the tipus challah fell over there on the gray part, the top part, and it became bosor b'chalav, and we're afraid that it answered it all the way down to the level of the Michael. Okay, that's the smag is machmer on the top part and is mekel on the bottom part. So now, if you make a hole in the bottom, what's going to happen? The pot's going to shake. What's going to happen when the pot shakes? No.
It'll go to the top.
Exactly. This area over here, that this top layer over here of food is going to come treif, because it's a bit shotgun. It's going to move around a little bit, and it's going to come onto the treif pot, and it's going to become treif. So it's a problem. So they don't want you to make a hole in the bottom. The same thing would apply if you want to take it out with a spoon. Okay, you can take out a spoon. Then the second you put in the spoon, the level raises. So that's going to be a problem. Okay. So that is basically the explanation of the minhag laser, because when this whole thing was going on, pots don't sit so tamely, and they're boiling and they're moving and they're going up and they're going down, and their tipus challah fell on it and nobody touched the pot and things didn't get moved around. So we're worried about the same thing. So therefore, the minhag, says the Mechaber and Sifov, that even though al pi din the food is okay, and the way to get it out is you have to wait until the food and the pot becomes cold. Cold means not yatzaledisbay anymore. Then it doesn't have the power to answer anything. We don't care if you pour something into that. We learned in Sim Tzadik Aleph that if you put something on a treifa keli, so what happens if it's cold? It's not going to answer anything. So you don't do it. It's going to need hadach or whatever the case is. But here you have no other choice. And the mamashas on the inside, we're not worried about. We're only worried about the tam. So you don't have to worry about doing hadacha. And since it's cold, you don't have to worry about the taste coming out. So therefore, you wait until it cools off and then pour it out. That's what it says Sifhei. But the minhag is, Mechaber says in Siv Vov, is to answer it. The Shach, by the way, says the minhag Ashkenaz is not to answer it. By the way, minhag Ashkenaz is to wait until it's nistan. But we'll get to that soon. Okay, so that's the difference. According to the Smak, he differentiates between the top, which becomes Aser, and the bottom, which is Mutter B'Shish. Clear? So far, so good. We're with the program.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the Gemara we just learned before. Here we learned the boy minay. Yeah, what's with mixes keli? And we said bishul b'mixes keli needs. So then the Maram Rottenberg said we learned this already. Yeah. Okay. Let's go further.
The
So how does-
Smak says that even if there's 60 in the higher part of the pot, that's also
Yeah, he doesn't go with only the Maram Rottenberg. They're masupik. So the Smak, you don't know exactly how this works. How are we going to identify where it goes and where it doesn't go? And who says, so here, it's spreading out. Where's it spreading? It's going equal in each direction. It depends on the heat. Is it going more to the side or more to the top or more to the bottom? Maybe it's according to the temperature. Who knows? We don't know. It's a suffix. We don't even know for sure it's going anywhere. B'chlal. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know whether you could use the rest of the pot to be mavatal either, like the smak. Okay, we don't pass like the smak. Okay, but the smak is not going to. See, the Maram Rottenberg says if you have 60 times 60, so then that will be mavatal. Why? Because he limits the damage to the Maram Rottenberg. He says it can only answer until shishim. It's one tippa. How far can it go? So we'll ask it shishim. You don't know exactly where it is. So who cares? If in the whole thing, it'll you'll have shishim, connected the shishim, then it'll be okay. But he's mitzdaref the tafshil. The smak is not so happy with what Mandachar made a tafshil. Who says it's going to be able to be mevatel the tam, which is above the tafshil, says the smak. It's a suffix, so the smak doesn't want to use the tafshil in order to be mevatel it. Okay. So,
Without a tafshil,
so let's do this. We'll take some questions. Let's just go through. According to this smak, maybe excuse me, it goes in quarter both really, that it's going to go into the keli. It's not going to be batal b'shishim. B'lachin kol ha'chelek harek neser misafek. V'asol la'aris mimenu tafshil reseich sh'os le'aseh. Okay, this is a smak. He says maybe there's no batal b'shishim on the mokam harek. Maybe not. So he's going to answer the whole thing. So therefore, you can't pour out the tafshil because it's going to become usher. This whole thing is usher. So you can't pour out the tafshil before it cools off. Now, what's going to be with the chalv that fell over here? Okay, so we say that you have bittul b'shishim, but what exactly is happening there is like we took away the wall, like it just fell in, like it fell into an open pot of cholent. Is that what happened here? Or the smak is mitzad suffik. So mitzad suffik, so he's sure that you can use the tafshil to do bittul b'shishim. Yeah, it looks like he's not so sure what's with the kedera. So what exactly is going to go? What exactly is the hezber? Why is this bittul b'shishim? Why? What's the explanation over here? And what are we sure about? And what are we not sure about? And there's a machlekes shach and tas. Okay, what was your question?
By the smak. So he says that in the top, even if there's 60 just in the pot, because of the suffix how far it's going, he's not going to rely on the 60 from around the pot that's above the food to be mitzdarf.
No, he's mesupik. He doesn't want to rely on Maram Rottenberg's heter to limit it. Maybe it'll just keep going and answer each individual area.
Mm-hmm.
And it's possible chalav. You have a din nas and avela here. Before we go further, we're going to get back to the shach and taz here. I debating whether I should go into it, but I think it'll help you. If you find the next section confusing, ignore it, but I think it'll help explain the opinion a little bit. It looks like we're treating the pot like it's a piece of meat. Yeah, we know it's not the same, but on the other hand, tam ke'ikr, so it's fleshik. But is it like meat? Is it like meat? You can use when the tipas challah fell on the cheticha shel bosor, so you can have shishim in the bosor. I mean, the fact is that when the tipas challah fell on the bosor, we're going to swear on a sefer Torah that the milk got equally distributed throughout the entire cheticha? No, in fact, probably not. When it's lach balach, dama parv, dama soyer, okay, so liquids get mixed together more evenly. Lach balach. But Yovish b'Yovish, it doesn't happen. That's what we said by Nas and Nevela. We said last week we don't have the same thing. So even in the Bosor, okay, so some milk fell into the cheticha shel Bosor. So we can use the whole cheticha shel Bosor to be mevatel the cholav. That's really we really think it got evenly distributed. Not particularly, but we can use the din is you can use the whole thing to be mevatel b'shishim. Now, once it became masa, let's say you can squeeze out the cholav. What do we say? We say efshel sachta aser. If you hold cheticha nasa nevela, so that goes together with efshel sachta yaser, right? We mentioned that earlier. And the whole idea is that once it was nasa nevela, so then the whole thing becomes aser forever. So even though you put this piece that became aser into a whole other big pot and everything became bottle, and we assume that the tam cholav came out of the bosor and got evenly distributed with the rest of the pot, you put it together with 1,000 times more. And so you want to be mat to that piece too. So we can't, it's you might be mat to it because of bittul, okay, but it itself is still aser. If you know where it is, you have to take it out. It's aser, right? That's what we learned before. Now let's apply this to kalim. Does nas and nevela apply to kalim? Is the keli nasa nevela? What happens? The metal became nevela? What in the world is happening over here? So there is a sheet that's actually Shittas Ramah. You really learn about this more in Taruvas. It's mentioned over here just in passing, but it's a whole subject over there beginning Ilchos Taruvas. Is there such a thing as Chaticha Nasan Levela by Keli? Even the Ramah, who holds that there is, most of the Apostles say not that the Keli is Nasan Levela. The time absorbed in the Keli is Nasan Levela. That's why we're going to distinguish over here in the Ramah between a brand new keli that was never used and a keli that was used and had time inside. Okay, but let's say you have to kasher a keli, and we say now we have a treif and a keli. You have a keli that cooking a bosbachal. Let's not get into the machlekes, the ben Ephraim, the Rabbeinu tam. It's a chaticha nasan avela, whatever the case is. At least according to that sheet that says a keli is nasan avela. So now let's say we have bosbachal, it was cooked in a pot, and it's mamish issergam. Fine. If you get the taste out, is the keli still aser? What do you say? Keli stays aser forever? Metal keli
Becomes pogum.
Can you get the taste out?
Kasher.
Yeah, that's actual kalim. That's a golas kalim. So for sure, it's not the same thing. Not the same type of iser. We can get that iser out. Okay, when the time of the case, so it's not mamish the same thing, but it just shows how unpredictable and how ignorant we are about what's happening to the time inside the keli. How do you differentiate the keli itself from the time inside the keli and where it is that it's going? Where'd you come from? Where are you going? So if that helped you understand why there's so many sfeikas flying around over here, then that's good. And if it confused you, just forget I mentioned it. But I think it sheds light on the murkiness of this whole subject. Okay, let's go further now. We have, as I mentioned before, we have a machleke shachantaz in the explanation of the smak. Okay, the shach goes according to the hezber of the Beis Yosef, and the Taz goes according to the hezber of his father-in-law, the Bach. Both the Beis Yosef and the Bach are both on the page of the Torah. Okay, it ends up being the shtalsha later on. And we're explaining now the smak is mesupik. What is the suffix of the smak? What is it? What's the problem over here? What is happening over here? So one possibility is does it spread in a strong way or a weak way? And that's a suffix. So one possibility is that the tipa mispashet is b'chol dafnas asir mispatels b'shishim. Maybe you could take the smag svara and say that the tipa spread throughout the entire keli. But let's not hold like the shita of the smag and say it's not mitzarefli b'mavatul. Maybe you can use everything, all the walls, to mivavatul b'shishim. In other words, this pashtus, the way this milk spreads out, it goes everywhere. It goes everywhere. It goes into the tafshil, it goes into the kedera. Maybe, we don't know. We don't really know how far this time is traveling. We don't know. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that it doesn't travel too far. It's only going to travel on the easy road. It's not going to travel on the difficult road. So therefore, the second possibility that is pashtus chalosh. It doesn't go too far. It's a weak pashtus. The easy path is, since there's activity coming over here in the bottom part of the kedera, that's negara reitev, and there's all sorts of moisture and heat and the kachzach activity. So over there, okay, that's easy for it to travel. So it's going to negara reitev. So maybe it's going to go that far. So it'll go that far, but it's not going to go into the rest of the kedera. So if we take efsharas base, if you take the second possibility, is pashtus chalosha. So I'm going to say what? We're going to say that over here inside the reitev, the tafshil itself, as long as you have shishim, then it's going to be okay. Okay? And what's with the top of the kedera? It's also okay, if that's what's happening. The rest of the kedera is okay, because it doesn't have the power to go there. But according to the first possibility, okay, it's going to spread throughout the entire kedera. So we're not sure whether it goes into the kedera, the rest of the kedera, or it doesn't go into the rest of the kedera. So if you have shishim just in the food itself, So according to both ways of looking at it, you have Bittul B'Shishim. It's not a problem. But since we don't know whether we can be mitzvah the rest of it, so then we're not sure. So you have to answer the rest of it. So therefore, Asirat's made Tzorach Hagola. That since we have the taste there and we don't know whether it has the ability to be mavatalit, you have to kasher the keli. Because according to the first way of looking at it, it's going to spread it equally. It's especially chazuk, so it'll go inside the tafshel, it'll go into the keli. Okay, so maybe it's not enough. So that smak chooses his machriya that as far as what's inside the reitev, so therefore we'll say, okay, as long as you have shishim, it's okay. But we're worried it also spread to the rest of the kedera, where the sholei keneged tafshel, and we're worried you don't have shishim over there, so we're going to go. It's not of the shishim, or it doesn't. They don't have shishim, and therefore he's going to answer the pat, but he's not going to answer what's b'secha tafshel. So the suffix, according to the shach, the suffix of the smak is how far and how strong is the spashtus of this milk. How far does it go? Does it go only to the easy places and only a little bit, or does it go further into all different sorts of places? That's according to the shach. But according to the Taz, it's a different story. According to Taz, it's more black and white. Is it mispashet or is it not mispashet? It's more binary. Other yeah, other nicht. So one possibility is it's like it fell straight into the tafshel. Chalav mispashet kule altei chatafshel. It's as if the entire milk fell straight into the tafshel. Yesh spashtus, and it goes straight in, and therefore bittul b'shishim helps. Okay, but he's also not sure. It could very well be that it's not mispashet at all. It just stays put. The chalav ain't mispashet klal b'nishabim came in. It doesn't go inside. So therefore, according to the Taz, it's basically a memonafshach. No matter how you look at it, the tafshel is going to be okay. What's the memonafshach? That if it went inside, according to the first possibility, it's there is a spashtus, and it went inside, and you have shishim in the inside. So what shishim? No problem with the tafshel. According to the second possibility, that it's not mispashet, and it didn't spread to inside. So then also life is good, as far as the tafshel is concerned anyway. As far as the kedera, it's a different story, because we're worried maybe the tam stayed in the kedera, so we have a problem with the kedera. But for whatever reason, the smak is not sure, maybe it doesn't go in at all. So if it didn't go in, so the tafshel is good. The kedera is not good. What's to use the kedera second time? Well, but pashas, you'd say if it didn't go in the first time, who said it should go in the second time? So it's not going to be a problem. So we have the tam, which is in the tafshel, but it's sort of like, who cares, according to the second possibility? If it's not going into the tafshel anyway, it's not going to do any harm. Okay, but according to the first possibility, it goes in. As long as you have shishim, it's okay. Whole discussion of the first time you had shishim, the second time you didn't have shishim. Okay, we're going to get to that soon. So therefore, according to the Taz, mekara din asir and it's archagola. You don't really need to kasher the pat, mekara din. Why? Because if you had shishim, and the whole thing fell in according to the first possibility, so in Bechal, there's no problem. There's no tam left in the Kedera. The whole thing batal b'shishim, there's no tam cholav in the Kedera. And even according to the second possibility, where the tam cholav got stuck in its place, back over there in the walls of the Kedera, but for whatever reason, it doesn't go into the tafshel. So it doesn't go into the tafshel. Why should you have to kasher it? Like using a tray for keli for cold. Here it's hot. But for whatever reason, when it falls mibachutz, it's also a suffix. Maybe b'chal doesn't go in. He's not sure the smak, according to the explanation of the tas. Okay, and if it's not going to go in, so bekaridin, why kasher the keli? You don't need to kasher the keli. Nevertheless, the tas says no, it's marasayin. You're going to take a thing and tipus challah fell on it, and you're not going to kasher it. So lechatchila ish lachshiru b'glam marasayin. But it's only lechatchila for whatever reason, something which is caused of marasayin. There's different hatedim, but the Yevid and have some merub, or sometimes you have a keli. It's a klicheres. Klicheres you can't kasher. So if it's only mishum marasayin, you're not going to ask the keli. You're not going to throw the keli in the garbage. It's only mishum marasayin. But according to the explanation of Shach, you want to kasher the keli. You need to kasher the keli.
But if there isn't 60, in the corner of Sharas, the first.
If there's 60, then again, no. So then it's out the suffix. You have to answer it. Tafshel becomes aser, and the kedera becomes aser. So now, what are you going to do? Okay, what's the takana for the pat? So the real question is according to the shach, not according to the taz so much. Okay, but according to the im nishbach keneged hatav shel v'yeshishim keneged hacholav hatav shel muter v'asir osir. Okay, so now listen to the interesting thing now. Let me just stop the screen share for a second. Go to personal. I learned I can use this thing over here to take attendance. So take attendance. Second. Attendance. Okay. So yeah, I'll close this. So what did we say before? We said that if the food is kosher and the kedera is not kosher, so what should you do? What did we say before? You want to make sure that when you pour out the food from the keli, let's say the top of the keli is treif and the food down over here is kosher. There's a bit of b'shishim out on the bottom, and you're worried that the tam was mispashet and you didn't have a keich bittul on top of the pot. So what do? How are you going to get it out? We're not going to let you use a spoon because it's going to go up. We're not going to let you make a hole in the bottom. So how are you going to get it out? What do we say?
Wait till
it cools off. Exactly. Wait till it cools off and then pour it out. Good, fine. Let's say for whatever reason, you're not worried about the top of the keli. So the top of the keli is okay. You had bittul b'shishim into the side. So there's any limitations what you should do? So the answer is yeah. Why? Because again, we're not paskening that, yeah, the Shulchan Aruch pasken yeah bittul b'shishim. So it fell nega aretiv, and we consider it that it fell inside directly, and bittul b'shishim. It'll become mutter b'shishim. Okay. But we're still mesupik. There still might be some left in the wall. In other words, we're not sure, even if we need shishim against all the chalav, because we're worried, maybe it all goes in, maybe it all goes straight through the wall into the meichel. So we need shishim, but let's say there was an ounce of milk. Let's say 20 tippers. Yeah, there was a milliliter, there were 20 tippers of milk fell on the outside of the kedera, negara rate. Fine. Now, so what do you need? You need shishim. What's shishim? 60 times 20 is whatever, 1,200. You need 1,200 drops, figure it out, whatever, 600 milliliters, whatever happens, whatever comes to. Okay, so you need that, then you have it. But do we really know that there's nothing left in the walls of the kedera? Are we sure that all 20 tippas went through and didn't leave a ration in the keli? No, we don't know. We're mesupik. So since we're mesupik, so we have to be machmer and take into account that possibly all 20 drops went straight through and they fell into the keli. So we need shishim against those 20 drops. Okay. But does that mean that we're parted from worrying about the keli now? Because we say, okay, fine, everything fell in, end of story. Nothing left in the keli. No, we can't say that because we don't know. Maybe there's still something left inside the keli. Good, you with me? You want to know who cares? So I'll tell you who cares. Shulchan Aruch cares. Why does Shulchan Aruch care? Because we have something which is called mevatel isel lachatchila. Let's say you had a keli that was filled, come out all the way to the top. Okay, and we have the smack, and we're going to say, okay, you had shishim, fell connected a reitiv, and this part over here is treif. Let's say when you finish the whole cheshbon, that you had bittul in all the food over here against this little strip on the top of the keli. So what happens if you pour it out? It's going to be bittul b'shishim anyway. So why do you have to wait? What the Shulchan Aruch should say is that if you don't have shishim against the part of the keli that's usher, then you have to wait till it cools off. But he doesn't say the Shulchan Aruch. It says you have to wait till it cools off. Why do you say that? So you have another problem about lechatchila. In other words, we don't do something lechatchila and rely on bittul b'shishim. So we're going to say we're going to pour it out over here through the top, even though it's hot. And we're going to say it's not a problem because it's such a small area, it's bittul b'shishim. You're not allowed to do that for a different reason. You're not allowed to be mavatal lechatchila. So even though it's not going to lead to an isser, it's mavatal isser. Mavatal isser lechatchila. So you mavatal isser, but you're not allowed to do it, even though it's not going to safe mice. It's going to be bittul b'shishim, but you can't do that. That's another issue. You learn about that in Tarus. Not allowed to be mavatal isser. With me, that's why you have to wait till it cools off because we don't want it to absorb anything. According to that, if it fell connected a reitiv, and you had shishim, so the tafshil's mutter. Okay, tafshil's mutter. Do we also have to worry that maybe all of it didn't fall in at once and some of it is continuing to go in? So we have to worry about that too. So if you let it sit around, so then you also have a problem about the list of natchila. Because there's tam chalav perhaps that's coming through from the outside. So the shaila is, when is it that we let it sit and cool off? Because we're worried about mavatal lechatchila. And when is it that we pour it out as fast as we can because we're worried about mavatal lechatchila? Either way, we're worried, and everything's only a suffix. We're worried there's some tam chalav hanging around here. Where's it hanging around? Is it hanging around on the top? Is it hanging around on the bottom? Okay. So basically, we're going to differentiate between where the chalav fell. Okay. So let's go back over here to the screen. So he said over here, so im nishpach keneged hatavshel, so it fell on the bottom. V'yesh shishim keneged hacholav, hatavshel mutter v'asir aser. So we said the tavshel is mutter because he had bittul b'shishim. The sir is aser because we're worried about the tam. Even if it fell neged habasar, but we're not sure that everything fell in. Maybe there's still some tam cholav left over there. It's going to come out. Lochen yesh laras miyadi, says hatavshel masir. Get it out as fast as you can, because you have the tam chalav, which is neged hareitev, and we're not sure it all came out, and we don't want to let it sit there and have more tam come in. So get it out as quick as you can. So therefore, if it fell on the bottom, neged hareitev, then get it out. Now, where do you pour it out from? So here also, see, we don't assume that the entire pot became aser. Pour it from the opposite side where the chalav fell. So that's, I guess, what these lines are over here. Take the opposite side of the keli, okay, which is going to be the weakest espashtus of the tam, and pour it out on the second side of the keli, as far away from the chalav as you can get it. Okay. But what's going to be the story if the tipas chalav fell in the makam hareik? So that we learn from the smak, he differentiates. So on the bottom, if it fell neged hareitev, so then pshishim is going to help. And if it fell in makam hareik, so makam hareik neser. We pass like the smak, and like that, the Maram Rottenberg would say if you have shishim, shishim would be okay. But the smak doesn't go for that. He asks the whole makam hareik. So since the whole makam hareik is treif, so now you have no braid and nothing you can do. Okay, that's in yeshlut. Wait till it cools off. We assume that it only aser the makam hareik and it didn't aser. That's what the Mechaber says in Sifhei. And Sifhei he says the minig is lahachmer, and the Shach says our minig is to be mekel, like the Mechaber said in Sifhei. Okay, we allow the tafshil. Okay, but certainly you should wait till it cools off. And then you empty it out. So there, this is, I guess, the temperature falling. You got snowflakes over here, whatever. You wait till it cools off. So now you don't have the steam coming out of the top over there. Now it's cool. So now it's cool. Take the opposite end. Actually, it doesn't really matter then at that point when it's cold. It doesn't really matter where you pour it out from, and then you can pour it out of the pot. Now that it cooled off, it's not going to become mustard, even though the top of the pot is also. When the Shulchan Aruch says, no, our minig is to be machmer, we don't rely on it cooling off, because we're afraid somebody along the line, somebody shook the pot, something happened, and it went up above that line. Yeah, over here, that something went from this, some of the tafshil went from below the line to above the line and became usher. Okay, so therefore he says the minig of mechshasha tafshil yigab b'chelak arek v'yaser. Maybe some of the food is going to touch the empty part on the top and it's become usher. Avashach maybe b'shem maroish menagenu lahakal adeit sin na tafshil. So made it a galoshen over there from the shach. The maroi, just I mentioned in the very first shiur that we have many that the last of the Ashkenazic Rishonim, you have a group of Rishonim over there. So you have the Maril, who also figures prominently in our Siman, the Maril, and then the Maril, he put together all the Minhaga Ashkenaz, and then he had Talmidim. You have the Isser Hatta Aruch, who was the next generation after him. And the more important, the Trumas Hadeshen. The Trumas Hadeshen also is known as the Maroi. He's known as the Maroi, and he also wrote Hagor Shari Dura. Do you remember Shari Dura was very popular, a sefer of halachas. Shari Dura was the same generation as the Rosh, student of Rabbi Rothenberg. Okay, Shari Dura wrote halachas. So Ramah wrote a whole pirish of halachas called Teres Chattas, mentioned a few times. And the Maroi wrote Hagoy Sharidura, which always is coming up over here throughout Yeredeya. Hagoy Sharidura, Maroi. So the Shach has a lashon over here. Oyim Veneda, Shach says, give you the quote. Shach Sivov. Yeah. Shach of Dalit. He was the last one and the greatest of his generation. And he worked out and was masader and investigated all the menhagim because of the negim lahater al yedei tzinun. And the Marshal writes, the Shach writes up here. So we'll soon see the mechaber inside. Mechaber Sif Hey says that it's mutter al yedei tzinun if it fell in the makam arik. In Sivav, he says the minig is lahachmir, but the Shach says no. The minig Ashkenaz is to be mekel, and there are many Svardish poskim that also say that you can be mekel. It's not only minig Ashkenaz to do so. Sorry, I just have to do my muting responsibilities here. Okay, questions?
According to the Shach, the problem with Keneged Malkam Arek is that we don't know how far it's Nespashet, right?
Basically.
Is it just in the Malkam Arek, or does that include the whole plea?
We're not assuming, according to the understanding of the smack, that it's not going to go down into the tafshil. Otherwise, we'd have to answer the tafshil.
Meaning, if it would be Nespashet throughout the whole kli, the tafshil wouldn't already be mevatel b'shishim?
It's a shayla whether you could be mitzdarif.
Meaning to pour it out.
We don't know whether you could be mitzdarif the rest of the time either to be mevatel.
Meaning
otherwise it's all like Rabbi Rothenberg.
To pour it out from the other side. Meaning, if for Cheshishin it was Nespashet all the way to the other side, then it should have already been bottle b'shishim.
Well, but that's right. So we're worried about being mevatel l'chatchila. That's what we're taking out of the pot fast, right? So that's what we're getting it out.
But that's only Keneged Tafshil, not Keneged Makam Arek.
Okay, so if it's the Makam Arek, once it's cold, you don't have to do it.
I'm saying to do it while it's hot when it's Keneged Makam Arek.
So that, according to what we learned so far, you're not allowed to do, because you're gonna be matrif the eichel. We're soon going to see in Siv Zayin different. Shas Adchak. But if it's not Shas Adchak, you can't pour it out when it's hot. You can answer it. You're cooking food in a tray for keli. Okay, we got another, we have a number of other factors that are thrown into the pot, if you pardon the expression. Okay. So the Shulchan Aruch mentioned this svara. Im nofla kamus katana keneged ha'esh hatav shel moter. So in other words, let's say a drop fell right over here by the Eish. There's a Mordechai that says, what does it mean, a small amount? He says 4 or 5 tipus. There's a Mordechai. Okay, it just says if it's a small amount. So there's Shulchan Aruch. So our pots cook from the bottom. Hopefully this works out better. When they're talking about pots in the days of the Gemara, most of the time, okay, the fact is you have sometimes sphesis, steak you can put on top. But it was most common to put inside an oven like this. So you'd have a dreifus, you'd have some sort of tripod on the bottom over there. Tripod is dreifus, yeah, that's a dreifus. Octopus is 8 feet, has 8 feet. Anyway, so you have a tripod or something to keep it out of the fire. You got the fire burning on the bottom, then you have the pot over here. So then if some cholav spilled on the side of this pot over here, so then the fire burns it up immediately. So that's another kula. If you have a small amount and it fell mamish neged ha'esh, so then we're not worried about it because it got burned before it even had a chance to be absorbed. It got burned right off. The fact is, we don't even do this too often, okay? But our pots are being heated from the bottom. So the fact that you have here, at least you got a little bit of flames coming over here, shaykh, some milk spilled down over here on the bottom, mamish keneged ha'esh, that the eish could burn it up. But if it fell over here, that's not keneged ha'esh anymore. It's just falling on a hot kladishon. So we don't have this heter. So this whole idea is very not applicable in today's metzias. In our kalim, you would have to have something closer to this, where you'd have the fire mamish burning it off. Okay. In any case, that's the din Shulchan Aruch. So vad din shel asir kishnofel keneged ha'esh. So what's the din? So certainly the Michael is going to be okay because it got burned up before it was able to be absorbed into the through the walls of the pot into the food. What about the seer itself? What about the pot? Do we have to worry about the pot? So the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if the small amount is neged ha'esh, you don't have to worry about the pot either. The Ramah says it's okay. The Shach brings down from Teres Chatas. It's very interesting because Teres Chatas and Ramah is the same person. Okay, the Teres Chatas has more explanation in it because he wrote it as a sefer based on the Seder of Sharidura basically, but he has a lot more explanation. The Ramah is just Piskei Halachos over there, and he writes over there that the Teres Chatas lachatchila you should also aser a pat. You should kasher a pat lachatchila. Okay, what's b'diavad? If you used it without kashering it, a different story. Maybe if you could take into account if it's a material you can't kasher or something like that. But in any case, the Ramah says clearly you don't need to worry. We'll learn it inside soon. And Sifvav, that the Ramah says that you don't have to kasher a pot either. Not only you don't have to worry about the food, you don't even have to worry about the pot. We had many cases where the food's going to be kosher, but you still have to kasher the pot. The Ramah says in this case you don't have to kasher the pot either. The Shach says lechatchila you should kasher the pot. He says, the Ramah said himself in Teres Chatas. You have over there Machlekas. Okay, so the time has come to learn inside. And we'll learn this inside, and then we'll take in Mitzvah Hashem a break. So we basically learned most of this outside, except for Siv Zayin. So Siv, hey, Tipas Cholov. Shenofla ala kadeda she'etza le'eish mi b'chutz. So it fell on a kadeda that's actively cooking now, and it fell on the outside of the pot. So we pass the Mechaber paskins like the smak, and he differentiates between the top of the pot and the bottom of the pot. Im nofla keneged tafshils, if it fell on the bottom where there was food inside. So what's the din? Ain't sarach elashishim keneged atipa shemafapas lifnim. You only need shishim to be mavatal the tipa which we're assuming went through the wall into the tafshil. It's as if it fell into the tafshil, at least as far as the food is concerned. That's if it fell neged ha'reitif. Let's say it fell on the top part of the pot, in the place where there was no food. And then v'him is all suffix, and we're worried that it's going to spread down the wall of the pot. So we don't know which direction it's going. So even if you want to be mitzdarif, all the taste which is there in the pot to be mavatal it, but we don't know how far it's going. We don't know which direction it's going, and maybe it's a thin strip which is going down towards the food, and you don't have shishim, and maybe also it's going to be so close that it's going to be very, very close to the tafshil, and it's going to answer the whole makam hareikim mamish to the borderline between the top and the bottom, having naser eisem makam hakdera. So that part of the kedera becomes aser. And if you pour out the food in the part of the kedera that became aser, so you're going to aser the tafshil, which is the place in aser tafshil. So clearly, the place where the milk, was, where the milk splattered. So over there, that's clearly the place which we're worried about the aser. What's about the opposite end of the pot? So we're not as worried, but on the other hand, we don't really know how far it's traveling. So therefore, you can't pour it out the other side of the pot either. What should you do? Let it sit and don't touch it until it cools off. Okay, so that's the din of the smak. We're going to skip the Ramah for now, like I told you before. We'll come back to the Ramah. Now in Sivav, along comes the Macham. It says, Nagu Eilam, lesser keshnafal defen shalei keneged ha'reitif. So the minig Eilam is to answer even the food when it fell shalei keneged ha'reitif. Okay. Then he adds this heter that we added at the end. What if it fell mamish keneged ha'eish and we have a chance of burning it off? So when do we say we have this miniga elam to be more machmer to aser the food? And as I mentioned to you before, the Shach says from the Maroi that we're that miniga Ashkenaz to be made. Yeah, but if it fell in the pot, but not directly in the fire. But it fell in the place where it's exposed to the fire, mutter. Because right away the fire is going to burn it away and it's going to dry it out. And the Ramah was that's what we had over there from the Ramah, that the Ramah says, this is this Ramah, that if it fell keneged ha'esh, not only it burned it up in matter of tafshel, the Ramah said that itself is also mutter. The Shach, as we said over here, see, you have the Shach commenting on this Ramah, that the Ramah is machmel. The Ramah says the kedera is okay, and the Shach points out lechatchil yishakasher the keli here too. But dafka b'davar muat, and not only if it's a small amount of milk, again tipa, if it's a drop. The Mordechai has a few drops. Avalim nafel harbe, but if the whole bunch of milk spilled over there, who cares? It's neged ha'esh. Ein lahater, I feel im nafel neged ha'esh. You can't allow it even if it fell neged ha'esh. Ale im kain keneged ha'reitiv. The only time we're going to allow it if it fell keneged ha'reitiv. Val yedei shishim. And when you have shishim, it's okay. The Ramah is vaz ha'kedera havi asura. But the kadera we're still going to answer because we're still afraid that there's something which is left in there. So it's the way the Shach is learning like this Ramah, that we still have to worry about the kadera itself. I feel yesh shishim b'tavshel neged ha'tipah, even if you have shishim, but it doesn't mean that the entire milk came in. Maybe only some of the milk came in, and it's going to continue. Even if all of the milk fell into one place. So then, like the example I gave, if there's 20 tippas, so then you have to have shishim times that, you have to have 1,200 tippas inside. Okay, but we don't know all 20 came in. Maybe it's coming in gradually. A couple of tipas came in, and more tipas come in. So even if they all came in, it would still be okay because it's still going to be batal b'shishim. But on the other hand, if you let it sit there, and it fell connected or rativ, so you don't gain anything by letting it sit there. Therefore, the Ramos of Yad in that case, when it's a makam reik, so you have to let it sit until it cools off. But if it fell to negative rativ, then you got to get it out as soon as possible. So pour it out immediately on the other side of the pot, far from the tipa. We don't know. Maybe it spread there too, but maybe it didn't. And certainly it's not as much as in the place where it's sitting. So either way, it's going to be mavatal the chatchila. So this way, you're safer. In bishla and whatever it applies the first time, it applies the second time too. So remember, the way the Taz learned, the way the Taz disagrees with this whole analysis, because the Taz holds manavshach. If it went in, it went in. If it didn't go in, it's never going to go in. So therefore, Be'ikar Adin, that's what we learned before, that the Taz holds Be'ikar Adin, you don't need to kasher it. You don't need to kasher this kedera. That's the way he learns the suffix of the smack. Okay? Okay, Mishumar Asayin, you should do it. But Be'ikar Adin, he holds you don't have to do it. Now, one comes to Zayin, and that's the opinion of Bechil Me Parish. So let's say it's Erev Shabbos, and then you're cooking food for Shabbos, and then some milk falls on the outside of the pot. So now you got big trouble. You don't have time to cook everything else. And also the Nesekalim bring down to the same thing as Hafzer Meruba, B'shas Adchak, other cases of B'shas Adchak. Then the matter ad kedei kach her. Listen how far it goes. I feel sholei keneged reitif. Even if I feel sholei keneged reitif, I feel sholei keneged aish. Aydeshisha. Because part of the suffix is that maybe a taka travels through everywhere, even down to take a reitif, even into the bottom of the pot too. Who says it doesn't go there too? Maybe if it's like the diametric opposite of the smog. So let's say, yeah, it goes through everything, goes into everything. But unlike the smog who says it'll go into everything to answer it, but that existing tam is not going to join together to be mavatal the tipas chalav. So along comes Rechil Mefaris and say, no, you be mavatal the tipas chalav. And the Ramah says, and that's the minik. The minig is not to do like that all the time, obviously. It is that when it comes out of Shabbos or B'shas Adchak or something like this, so then you matter as long as you have shish. Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. So the time right now, Eastern time is 8:26. So 8:36 Amir Shel Hashem, we shall resume. Yeah, I would like to mention that there are certain things in the Chayveres that I'm not covering. Certain pratim. I don't cover every single prat. So the Chayveres is in some areas not just a Chazara. It gives more pratim also, which just reinforces, the necessity of learning it. But in general, everything is covered there, but it is a sikum, but that's written, you can learn it, and I'm trying to fill in things that I think need hesber and understanding, which will help, especially if you chazer it over right away, and the discussions are fresher in your mind to be able to apply it. Okay, so let's go further. So what are we up to? So we're over here, and we learned Mechaber Ramah. I mean, there's a whole big Ramah that we're gonna be diving into soon in Sif Zayin. But the basic din of Tipus Chalav Shnafla Kedera is basically in the Mechaber and these little pieces of Ramah that we learned up to now. And the summary from the Nesa Kalim. So what do you do? So here we see that in Sefei the Mechaber says you can leave it until it cools off, and then in Sevav the Noga Eilam. I also want to point out the Lashon Mechaber Noga Eilam is not that he's mamish pasking that that's the minig. There are people that are neg to be machmer, not to eat the food. And shach, as we mentioned, was the shach was made the shame of the Trumas Hadeshen from the Aroy, that in Ashkenaz the minig is to allow it. But again, allowing it after it cooled off, still have to let it cool off. Okay, and there are those that say they're mat b'shas hadchak. Like a neged the eish they shishim. Now the shaila is, do you need to let it cool off first too? I mean, it's every Shabbos in your hurry. What you got to get out of the pot. So what are you going to do? You have to wait till it cools off. Maybe you're not going to have enough time, especially in those days. You couldn't put it in the freezer to cool it off. And here you can't move it anyway. So you can't put it in the freezer. How long does it take till it cools off? A big pot of cholent. Takes a while till it cools off. And we're going to get to that soon. Okay, and the summary, the Shulchan Aruch, make it a din. It's okay, let's on the Sakadera, and then to pour out the tafshil. The minig is to answer it, even though I do it. Siyun. Tzinun and b'shas had chak yesh lahater kishesh shishim. We allow when it's shishim. So the Maroi says, the Shach brings down that we do allow minig Ashkenaz. Oh, they tzinun, and there's another heter over here. Another heter yesh b'tavshil the shishim pam shishim. So this is where the Maram Rothenberg. You notice that we didn't really mention him in the Shulchan Aruch or the Neis Kelim at all up to this point. But over here, he brings in that if you have that, you can also be mater. If you have shishim pam shishim neged the cholov. Okay, so now let's move. I was going to say to move on, but really, in a way, we're moving back. So this is the Ramah. You saw over here the Ramah over here on Sif Hey. So we didn't learn this Ramah. The Ramah says v'dafki makadera yeshana. This only applies when the kadera is old. Avolim hi chadasha. But if it's a new kadera, b'chol inyan ein tzorach shishim. Rak neged atipish nafla la kadlakamsim tzadches kabekaf. We're going to learn about kaf. Take a spoon. If you have a brand new spoon, and then you put it into a food, so the shaila is how much, what exactly is happening within. So it's absorbing the tam of whatever you put it into, but then it's just going against the keli. So as we mentioned before, Vishtimtus with the Ramah is another discussion. That's not the main place. It's not discussed mainly here. It's discussed later on. But according to Rav Poskim, certainly, the problem is, let's say Bosor b'cholov. So you're going to take, in our case, we had a tipas cholov that fell on a fleshik keli. What's the problem? I'm not worried about the metal of the keli or the clay of the keli itself becoming not kosher. We're worried about the tam belu of a keli. So that's why we're answering this keli, is because it has tam in it. So it's only when it's a kedera yeshana, it's old keli. Doesn't mean that it's not a nice keli. They're going to be machman on the keli. Mamish chadasha. No. We're worried about is there existing tam there already. So if it's a kedera yeshana, there's existing tam. If it's a chadasha, so then you don't need any shishim. We're not worried about the belia in the keli. We're just worried about the tipa itself. If it's a keli chadasha, so we're not worried about it becoming bosor b'cholov as a result of the belia, the taste that was absorbed in the walls of the keli. We're not concerned with the walls of the keli. It's a new keli. The new keli, there's nothing to become mustard. It's just the milk you have to worry about. Okay, so if you got shishim against the cholov, then you don't have to worry about the makam arekan. Makam arekan is a problem, says the Ramah, if it's a gedera yeshana, if it's an alta keli. Well, it's an alta keli with alta keli. If it's an old keli, it has blia in it, and they were worried it became bosor b'cholov. So now you have to be mashayir, not only against the tipus cholov, you have to worry that the blia. We've been saying the whole time that the makam arek and the keli became treif. We don't really mean, yeah, we talk about that the keli becoming treif, but ultimately the keli is becoming treif as a result of the blia. So if it's a chadasha, if it's brand new and there was no tam bosor inside the walls of the keli, so then you only need shishim against the cholov. Yeah, as we said, l'gavakaf. But the question is, like this is a very interesting din, but it doesn't make any sense. What are we talking about over here? We're talking about a kedera shel basar that's cooking on the fire. So if it's right now a kedera shel basar, so it's not a new keli anymore. What's the difference between an old keli and a new keli? The old keli has tam basar in it, and the new keli doesn't have tam basar in it. So what's going on over here? Here we're talking about a case But Rama says if it's an old keli, then you have to worry about the bli and the keli become basel b'cholav. If it's a new keli, you don't have to worry about it, and you just have to be mevatel l'cholav itself. You don't worry about the keli becoming treif. So what's going on here? If there's no tam basar inside the walls of the keli, the whole case is talking about you have a kedera shel basar, which is cooking, and the tipus challah fell onto the outside of the keli. So how could it be that there's no tam basar inside the keli? How could they have a case of a tam chadash, of a kedera chadash? So good question. Yeah. So the shach asks the question, and the shach brings 3 answers. Okay. What are 3 answers? The shach said 1, 2, 3 over here. Ice cream buttons over here. You know what? Let me talk first, and before confusing you a bit. There's one main answer. The other 2 a little bit more of a deichik. There was one main answer, and take it off. Talk to you. The main answer is the difference between a ben yemei and ein a ben yemei. So I'm sure you've all heard this in the past, but just since we didn't have it officially over here a great deal, so the din is, somebody mentioned before, we were talking about a gal's kelim, that the law is tam ke'ikr midaraisa, tam ke'ikr, okay, but that's only if the tam is a tam meshubach, if it's a good tasting tam. If it's a tam pogum, it's a not good tasting taste. So a tam pogum, so then that's ised derabban. So you're not allowed to use that kelim derabban because it's a gezeira because of a ben yemei. So what's a ben yemei after a tam pogum? So after the taste, it's not the food itself. If you have a day-old piece of chazer, it's alta chazer. If you have a day-old blia of chazer in a keli, so then since it's only the blia, tam keker take, but after 24 hours, it loses any tam meshubach. It doesn't have any good taste anymore. Taste fades, the taste gets ruined, whatever the case is. It's a tam pogum. And that's why it is that if you kasher a keli when it's a ben yemei, you got big trouble, because how are you pulling out the taste? For carrot, the taste is going to answer the water. Instead of the water pulling out the taste and getting out of the keli, you're going to make it even worse. At least if you say nas and nevela on the water. It's another issue. Okay. In any case, the nakuda is that once the tam in the keli is not a ben yemei, so then it's not really tam. Certainly midiraisa is not tam, it's a tam pogum, and it does not, in general, we learn later on about the din of a davar charif, if you have a sharp food that has a different effect, but in general, if you would have, we're soon going to get the kalim, don't wait, it's the gimel, it's the dalit, okay, that if you have a milchik pot, okay, and it's a ben yemei, and somebody fried a hamburger in the pot, they got bosor b'cholav deraisa. If you have a milchik pot and it was not used for 24 hours, and even if it was used in 24 hours, but it wasn't used for hot cholav. So let's take the case it wasn't used for 24 hours. So it originally was tam ke'ikr, milcha kapat. It's still a milcha kapat, but now it's only milcha kapat midrabban. And it doesn't really have the power to answer anything. So if you fry a hamburger, we're soon going to learn. If you fry a hamburger and that milcha kapat, but it wasn't used for 24 hours, the hamburger is mutter. With a tam pogum. Not banat, ain't ben yemei. Okay, we're going to learn about not banat. We're going to learn about all of these things. But it's a tam pogum. Tam pogum is a whole different category of thing. So therefore, the idea of one of the ways of getting this thing into the state where we can call it chadosha is if it was ein ben yemei. Now, how is that happening now? So here he explains one explanation. In blias habasar ein lamayla nemer gam sheblias achalav yard lamata. In other words, maybe we want to say that it's called chadasha. Maybe it was only used half a pot. So Taka, you're cooking bosor right now in the pot, but the bosor is only on the bottom part of the pot. So maybe we're going to say that in the top part of the pot, it's called chadasha, because we don't really know for sure We're concerned that the tam goes to the upper part of the keli. We don't know for sure the tam goes in the upper part of the keli. If it was never used in the top part of the keli, even though right now you're cooking Bosor there, that doesn't mean that there's for sure tam Bosor in the top. We're masupik, so we answer it, but you can't say for sure that it's there. Okay. So is it a two-way street? Is it going both ways? Another possibility. Very push the answer. Over here, let's say it was a brand new pot. You're cooking meat for the first time. Okay. And it's in there and it's on the fire and it didn't boil yet. It didn't turn yatzaledispa yet. And then the chalav spills on the outside. So then it's a kedera chadasha. So even though there's still some milk hanging around over there outside the pot, but it didn't become nasa nevela with the tam inside because there was no tam inside. Because when it fell on it originally, it was just still a parva pot because the water didn't even boil up yet. Later on, you're worried about the tam going up, but that's the suffix. Everything's a suffix here. We don't know for sure that the tam goes up. So we learned in the Gemara that if it was kodshim, that if you used half of the keli, mixes a keli, you have to kash the whole keli. But that's for kodshim, and that's just because of the pasuk, and maybe shari surah, maybe it doesn't really go there. So since we're masupik, we're machmer, but we don't know for sure what's happening. A third possibility says the shah cholav nafal al sir lifnei shechnis as a basel techaser. Push the answer. It's a fleshika pot, brand new fleshika pot, and it's taco hot now. And then the cholav fell on the pot to make it milchik, but the meat didn't fall into the pot yet. You plan on making a milk fleshika meichel, but you didn't put the flesh in. So there was no nasa nevela here. There was no tam bosor, which was yet absorbed in the walls of the keli. So if that's the case, you can be mashaya with shishim against the tipus cholav, because the meat came in afterwards. Anyway, those are three things just to push it to explain taich, the words that are Ramah. How is it shaykh a kedera chadasha? Fine. Now let's get to this din over here in Siv Zayin, the heter of Hilmi Paris, Erev Shabbos, Chorchim, and so on and so forth. So we're going to say Yesh Mishamad b'Shas HaTchak. Even if it fell in the makam arek, and even if it fell on the top, shas adchak, we have this heter Rabbi Chilmi Parish. And the Rama says hachinog. Fine. Now the shaila is, what are we allowing over here? What exactly are we allowing? We're saying the food is mutter. Okay, what about getting it out of the pot? Like, are all bets off now? So the Mashal says no. Marshall says we're not going to allow normally we would have a problem over here, but in this case, we're going to allow you to have it cool off, says the Marshall. Nishach and Taz both go to Marshall. You're going to cool it off before you pour it out. If your mamish have no time, it's out of Shabbos, and you got to get the event. Pour it out the other side of the pot, and then if you have no choice. And the Taz brings down this in Hilchas Tarufas. That is, b'shas hadchak, you have no other way to get it out. You don't have to pour it out the tzad hasheni either. In other words, this heter, Rabbi Chilmi Parish, how is he allowing this Haydei Shishim if it fell like a negarated? Because he's assuming they got evenly distributed throughout the whole thing. And we're also assuming, according to this, that all the taste and the tavshil, everything is joined together to mevatel this tipus chol. So that's the case. So the Taz says, so what's the problem? Pouring it out from the place where it poured also, it's bottle already. So the Mashal will only allow that if you have no choice. And l'chatchila, you should cool it off. And then if you have no time, then you can pour it out. You have to do b'tzad hasheni. And Taz says you have no choice. You can pour it out at the same side also. It's also not a problem. Okay, one more din, which is on our general scope of tipus cholav, and then we'll go to the long Ramah. What happens if it falls on the cover? So I mentioned this in the introduction. What happens if the cholav falls on the cover? So falling on the cover, is that like makam arekon, or is that like makam makamaretiv, makamatavshel. What is it? So on the one hand, I mean, it's a cover. So you might say it's like makamarek, and there's no actual food which is sitting on the cover. On the other hand, we see that it has a pula. If you remember, near Bakise, remember when we had the tipus cholv, it fell in the chaticha shel Bosor. So one of the ways to be out of it in the whole pot, as soon as you put a cover on, that itself, without even mixing it, you put a cover on. So as a result of keeping the steam and the juices and the liquid and everything, it's levedik and freilich inside that pot. Once you put a cover, it mixes everything up. So once it mixes everything, obviously it has a different effect than just the side of the pot, the fact that you're covering it. So what's the din if it falls on the cover? So before going further with this din, I'm gonna talk about a different din, somewhat related, not directly related, but I think if you understand over there, you'll understand better here. Steam, we're going to learn in Sifches, the whole thing about steam. You have steam coming off of a food. What's the status of steam coming off the food? And we're going to learn in Sifches, you have a machvas, you have a tray of milk, and you put it in an oven, and there's a tray of meat on top of it. So even though it's not touching, but there's just steam coming out, the steam coming out of the milk has the power to aser, to prohibit the meat which is on top. So the whole discussion, can you kasher with steam? So on the one hand, we could say when you're kashering something, goes kalim, so the water is 212 Fahrenheit, 100 Celsius. It's boiling water. What's steam? Steam is even more than that. Once it turns into 212, then it turns into steam. You can pressurize it, you're going to bring it up much higher than 212. Okay, so can we kasher? One might want to say that steam is even better than water because it's hotter than water. Water only can get up to 100 Celsius and then it vaporizes. Then when it vaporizes, it turns into steam. It's mamish gevaldik, one might want to say, because it's mamish even hotter than the water itself. But la halacha, we don't say like that. There are shittas that say that it's okay, it's as good as water, but the ikka la halacha, we don't say like that. And the reason is also pushed, because when you kasher with water, the entire surface is being covered. Water covers the entire surface of the keli. So wherever it was on that keli that food touched, and therefore there was an absorption of taste, so the water is touching that place, and when you bring the water up to boiling, it pulls out the taste and it kashers the keli. That's how goes keli. Mashen can steam. Steam, even if you do a lot of steam is not covering the surface in the same manner as water covers the surface. So it's a whole issue. Kashering with steam is generally not done, even though it's hot and even though there might be a lot of moisture, and it's still not kashering with water. So kashering with steam is a problem. So therefore, when we look at this kisui, on the one hand, we want to say that it's the same thing like being b'teichareita, because we got all of this food which is going straight up to the cover, and it's certainly much more contact with the food than the makamarek, than the gray part in this picture. But on the other hand, it's not the same as the makam tafshil. Makam tafshil, it's mamish being covered, like the example I gave you, with water. Mashenkin on the top, it's okay, there's moisture, there's steam, you take off a cover of a pot. After it was cooking, you see it's all full of moisture, but it's as full of moisture as if your mamish had turned the pot upside down and you had water boiling in it. So that's the discussion over here in the pasuk. So now, some milk spilled on the cover of the keli. So the Rama says it's like it fell inside. Okay, it's mamish like negara tafshil. Just like it fell in the bottom part, the brown part in this picture, because as I mentioned before, you got the food going up and down, so and so. The marshal's not happy. Marshal's not happy. You need shishim pam shishim, he says. Why? There was a moment that this tipus challah fell over there. Who says that there was steam and liquid at that moment? We need, at the time that the blia was possible, that this is now the time we're worried that the taste of the milk is going to get absorbed into the cover. Maybe at that time it wasn't boiling, it was boiling on the other side, it wasn't boiling right over here. So then it's going to ask a shishim. So then we bring in the same svara of Maram Rottenberg, who said, okay, so we'll say that the Asud Kadei Shishim. Okay, but if you have Shishim Pam the Shishim, then it's okay. So that's what the Marshal wants. The Marshal wants Shishim Pam Shishim. So it's not as good. Ramah, one Shishim is enough. And according to Marshal, you need two Shishim. And the Taz brings down Marshal, and he says if it's the Raisa, you should be Machmer like a Marshal and take Shishim Pam Shishim. But this is the Rabbi, you may make on one time Shishim. That's the Hachra of the Taz, Lagabe Kisui Kedera. Okay. Now, okay, I don't know why we don't have the actual Ramah here, but if you have a Shulchan Aruch in front of you or the Cheveres, so it's actually the last paragraph of the Ramah in Sif Zayin. In Sif Zayin, in the Ramah, we had the Hachineg, that the Kula of Shas HaChak out of Shabbos. Then we're going to have two paragraphs about other cases of spilled milk. And then the very last two lines, very end, the Sif Zayin, Tipash and Fellas al Kikabe Kisa Gedera, Dina Kanaf Lagabe Gedera Negadaretiv. Falls on the cover just like a fell Negadaretiv, which is for Gedera Larsiach. But it's only that the pot was boiling already. Because then the steam is going to go from the food in the pot up towards the kisui, and then it's going to fall down. That same steam is going to fall down from the top into the food, and that's the heter of the Ramah Kenegaraita with Fashishim. Mashal wants to be machmer, and Tas has to be machmer mokum shotei. So if it's chicken soup, you can like say shishim, and if it was the beef cholent, so then it's shishim pam shishim. Okay, questions? Very important in Kisui Kedera. Now, in order to understand the cases of the Ramah is going to be speaking about milk spilling out of a pot and then running somewhere, and then a flesh kabat being put on top of it, and it's hot, it's cold. A few cases we're going to have in the Ramah. In order to understand what the Ramah is saying, we have to review a few klolim. So it's a review because we mentioned it in passing. But every time we mentioned it in passing, we said that this is not the place where it's really discussed. It's discussed in Hilchas Taruv, Simon Kofei, famous Simon we're constantly referring to, because that has klolim which apply Kol HaTeira Kula, Hilchas Shabbos and Hilchas Bosor all over, Hilchas Melicha, all the different places where we have the general principles of transference of tam and the different types of kelim. So we have a general idea of klidishin, irik klidishin, klishain, and so on. What's a klidishin? So you have a klidishin, you have a pot that was on the fire. That's a klidishin, which was you have klidishin sha'ala eish, and you see there's no fire over here. The klidishin was taken off the eish. So this is called the klidishin shahusar me'ala eish. That is the din of tuldas eish, because it's not presently now cooking on fire, but it's also capable of cooking. It's capable of cooking, and I think I mentioned before, there's a difference between whether something's cooking. Talking about Bosor B'chol, we have Iser Bishul. Now we're talking not only the Iser Bishul, we're talking about whether there's a blia, whether something is absorbed or not. So then even if it don't need Bishul, maybe something is not capable of cooking, Mamish Bishul, like it would be for Bosor B'chol or for Shabbos. If you remember at the beginning of Pezayim, we discussed how much can we learn from Bosor B'chol to Shabbos and vice versa. It's another discussion with Shalmi. But when we're talking about absorption, so certainly a klidishin not only is going to absorb the taste, it's also capable of being mabashal diaraisa. Person's chayiv kares skila cooking at a klidishin was taken off the fire as long as it's still hot yet still this way. So that there's no question. Now, let's say here's a klisheni, and let's just say you're pouring from the klidishin on top of the klisheni. So that is called iri klidishin. Okay. If you have the food already in the klisheni and you're pouring from the klidishin on top of that food, let's say this would be a mug of coffee, or you have a tea bag on the bottom, and then you take the klidishin and you pour it on top. So if you have the tea bag already in the cup and you pour on top of it, you're cooking that tea with the iri klidishin, okay, which is a problem. If first you pour in the water, now it's a klisheni, and then you put in the tea bag, so then you're cooking with a klisheni. Which if it's tea, it's also a problem. What's the din of a klisheni? So that's a whole discussion. First of all, what's the din of iri klisheni? Excuse me, iri klirishin. What's the din of iri klirishin? So the din is, there's all machlekes a poskim, three-way machlekes, whatever the case is. Al pi halacha we paskin the iri klirishin is mavashal kadei klipa, that it will cook the upper layer of whatever it's being poured on. So if you had some milk and you pour on top of meat, it would do bishul on the top layer. It's mavashal kadei klipa. That's an iri klisheni. Now within iri klisheni itself, we have really two categories. We have lei nifsak hakiluach and nifsak hakiluach. So over here, it's lei nifsak hakiluach. We see that the bottom part of this milk, which is falling on top of the keli, the food, whatever it is, let's just say it's a fleshika keli, you're pouring milk into fleshika keli, so now I have to worry that we treifed up this keli. So how much does your treif up from the keli? So we say we treifed up kadei klifa. So that's talking about lei nifsak hakiluach, that the place where it touched the problem area, where it hit the bottom, okay, is connected with the pot. Lei nifsak hakiluach. So that's why, for example, when shilas come up, the most common shilas that happen in kitchens, at least the rabbis get called with, whether they're really shilas or not is another question, depends on the situation, that somebody mixed up the milchak and fleshka keglim when they were washing in the sink. Okay, let's say it was hot water. Let's say it was water yatzaledis. So the people usually wash the dish with yatzaledis, but as we discussed before, yatzaledis are not so hot. According to many shittas, at 40 degrees Celsius, what's it, 103 something Fahrenheit, is already yatzaledis. The lower share, this at 45 degrees is also not so hot. Using hot water to wash the kelim. But what kind of heat is that? It's not a klidishin. The klidishin is the boiler. It's the boiler. So it's coming through a pipe from the boiler out of your faucet. So when the hot water hits the keli, what kind of heat is it? It's iri klidishin. So only the very, very worst case scenario is going to be that it aser k'tei klipa. Okay, the only way it could be worse than that is if you wash the hot klidishin in the sink. So then it's tatogover, like we learned in Tzadik Aleph, and you have a hot klidishin, still yatza lettuce, and then you put something inside this, and then you could have a mamish problem answering the whole thing. But if it's just the kalim that are not hot from the fire, you're washing spoons and forks, plates, whatever the case is. So the worst case scenario could be iri klidishin. Even then, it's going to have to hit at the place, we'll discuss later on, but it's going to have to be that the fleshika and the milchik were at the place of contact. In general, we'd say that had to hit at that place. Well, we'll talk about that soon. Okay, so that's iri klidishin. So if it's iri klidishin, kabbalah kachpalte, you kasher iri klidishin. So that's very easy. How do you kasher it then? You let it sit for 24 hours, and then you pour hot water, you boil up some water, you pour hot water on it. Gendik. Alter Rebbe brings down in Hilchas Pesach, but you have to be careful. That it has the power of iri klidishin only if lei nifsak hakiluach. So if you poured something and then you put your hand back, and then it was cut off, and it's no longer connected with the klidishin, so then that's a different din. It starts a whole other machlekes. Do we also say then that it's going to be like a regular iri klidishin or do we clean it like less? Do we clean it like a klisheni? We'll discuss soon. But it's certainly a step down from an iri klidishin shalei nifsak hakiluach. Nifsak hakiluach is a different story. So we'll see in the Ramah some cases which are analogous over here. And what's with a klisheni taka? What's with a klisheni? So klisheni is another machlekes. There's a klisheni. Is it mavashal or not mavashal? When it comes to chashabes, so there are certain things we'll cook even in a klisheni. In general, we say klisheni. It's not mavashal. But then we say that things which are kali bishul, which cook very easily, will also cook on a klisheni. By the time you finish with this whole description, almost all foods fit into the exception. So everything we wear, it's kali bishul, except for certain things. You don't worry about the tavlin, you don't worry about liquids, but everything else we're worried, maybe it's kali bishul, it'll also cook on a klisheni. What about in general when it comes to isabat? There's a whole discussion over there. The place for this is again in Simon Kufay in Hilchos Taruvas. And you have dayas that say in general the klisheni, not only it's not mavashal, it's also not going to be mafli or maflit. It's not going to cause taste to be transferred from one keli to another. And those that are machmer. And those that say no, just like a klisheni in general is not mavashal, it's also not mavli or maflit. Again, So over there you have the nice kalim, a whole discussion about it. I mean, it's not the place. I mean, time to say that you're machmer, but have some ruby, you can be mekel. Anyway, that's an ilchus tarufus. Eid chazein l'meid. But that's the case of a kli sheni. So kli sheni, you're not mamish home free, but you're certainly in less of a situation of problem than you are in kli rishon. It's even less than irim kli rishon. Okay, so that's one. That's the main review, I guess, that we need to do before learning the Ramah. So we know that a kli rishon can be mavashal, and it could be mavlir tam in everything that it's going to go into. So this, I don't know why this is blue, but it's a blue hot fire, I guess. And here we have some milk boiling up in a pot. You see the bubbles, you see the line, the steam coming out. And then I guess people are crying over spilled milk because they learned some in Tzaddik Beis, because we're going to have some spilled milk over here. So what happened? Okay, so first of all, you took the kli rishon off Aish. If it's not on the fire anymore, like we said before. Fine. Once it cooled off, so you see the steam disappeared. So it's still a kli rishon. Let's say you leave this the soup, you take it off the fire Friday night, and you let it sit there, and eventually it cools off. We still have to worry. It's a kli rishon. So it's done and ain't an extra kli rishon. Yesh machmir lechatchila. There's a gzeir and kli rishon. There's a shach over there. It's very negaya la'alacha. We have a gzeir on a kli rishon, even if it's not yatzaledis, but it's very negaya in food production. You have cheese vats that are kli rishon, but they don't go up to yatzaledis. Do you have to worry? Do you not have to worry? Anyway, another discussion with Simon Kofei. A lot to discuss over there, but that's the din of a kli rishon. So we say kli sheni ain't a mavashal. Yeah. So it's not mavashal, but what about being mavliya taimim? Something a kli sheni. So here's the machlekes I mentioned. The Shulchan Aruch Amos kli sheni ain't nice b'diavad. But the mashal says kli sheni is yeah. It's a b'diavad. La'alach the Taz says you should be machmer like the mashal unless it's hefsed mub. Fine. Iri kli sheni, like we said before, there's a three-way machlekes. The Rashbam holds it's like a kli rishon. Like a kli rishon. The Rabbeinu Dam says it's asus kedei klipa, mavashal kedei klipa, and the Ri holds any mavashal. It's like a kli sheni. You got three different tastes. And in general, we pass on like Rabbeinu Tam that a iri kli rishon will be mavashal kedei klipa. That's Shulchan Aruch Ramah. You know, if it's nifsa kakiluach, oh, that's a different story. Then the Ramah says like a kli sheni. The Shach says it still has the power to be mavliya kedei klipa. So in other words, we'll be machmer. So we're not going to be mekel and say it's mamash like a iri kli rishon shalinif saka kiluch. That's why Nochas Pesach Rebbe said you have to be careful. You want to pull out the tam. So even though we'll be machmer and say that it'll be mavliya kedei klipa, but that doesn't mean we can be mekel and kash or something like that. If nifsaka kiluch, you have to be machmer in such a case. Okay, so that's basically the background we need to dive into this Ramah. Okay, first case of the Ramah. So this is the end of it, right over here. Im nishpach chalav, v'shar iser reseach al gaba karka. Case number one: you spill the milk on the ground. So the ground's cold, it's not hot. Spill it on the ground. Then you took a hot pot and put it on top of the spilled milk. What type of hot pot? Obviously a fleshka pot, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about milk and kapar, who cares? It's a fleshka pot. If it's on the ground, but it's mamish right next to the fire, so then it's a different story. So we'll soon see. But let's say it's shleika, it's not eitzel eish. You spilled a lot of milk and it's running down the road, whatever the case is. It's not being mushba at all from the heat of the original fire. It's just sitting there now. Leia havara klisheni. As then of a klisheni. Well, if then of a klisheni, what's going on over here, klisheni? Why shouldn't it be iri klirish? So we say that what's the difference between the heat of a iri klirishon and the heat of a kli sheni? What's the difference? What's the difference if you put the tea bag first in the cup, or you put first the water in the cup and then the tea bag in the cup? So like everybody knows, it'll cook much better if you pour straight on top of it than if you pour it in first. Why is that? Because what's a different type of chal iri miklirishin? It's the same water was in the klirishin a second before, and now it's over here. Why is this special the and over here? It's only mebashal kodekla, but what's the difference? So it's cooling off. The iri klirishin, when it's still in the pot, it's not really cooling off. I mean, you have the top of the pot, it's losing a little bit. But on the other hand, you got the hot walls of the keli, which are being machazik, the heat. So it's not really cooling off very fast at all, because we have the heat from the walls of the keli, which are being poured inside. Once you pour it out of the keli, so then we're out of the protective heat of the walls of the keli. So now it's not being heated up by the walls of the keli. And on the contrary, it's being exposed more to the air. So that's when you pour something out of a pot or out of an urn or whatever the case is, out of a chainik. So then there's all steam coming out all over the place because the heat is escaping into the air. So it's cooling off. So therefore, it doesn't have the capability of cooking the same way as a kli rishon does. Once you put in a kli sheni, so then something else also happens. What happens when you put in a kli sheni? Here you have a picture of a stainless steel bowl. You're going to pour boiling hot water in a stainless steel bowl. You're going to want to pick up that stainless steel bowl? No, you're going to burn your hands. Why is that? Because the heat is going out of the liquid into the walls of the keli, which means two things. It means, first of all, it's losing heat. So it's cooling off, not only because of its exposure to the air, it's cooling off as a result of the heat going into the walls of the keli. And another thing is, it's the opposite of the pool of the kli. By the kli, the walls are in the process of heating up, adding heat to the liquid inside the pot. Where in a kli sheni, it's going the other direction. So now, when you pour the water over here, you spill the milk, you spill it al gaber karka. So if you spilled it from the kedera right on top of the pot, yeah. So if the pot was hot, so for sure you'd have a huge problem over there. Like we're learning inside the galef, tatogova. So if you have a hot pot on the bottom and you poured milk on top of it, and there it's mamish a no-brainer. The milk is hot, the fleish kapat is hot, and the whole thing's in kamasah. There's no question about it. But now what happened was, and so too, let's say, for argument's sake, the fleish kapat would be cold. And then you poured hot milk directly from the pot on top of the pot. Okay? So what are we going to say? That's iri kli, because you're pouring from the kli, the milk from the kli, you're pouring it on top of it. Water, milk. For the milk, you pour it on top of the fleish kapat. So that's iri kli. Okay, if it was hot, then it's tatogava again. But if it was cold, but still it's going to Aser Kadei Klifa, right? But now it didn't fall directly from the pot, from the milk kapat, directly on the flesh kapat. It fell on the ground. So once it fell on the ground, so just like in the case of a kli sheni, it's cooling off not only from the air, it's cooling off because some of the heat is going into the walls of the keli. Over here, it's also cooling off because some of the heat is going into the ground. The milk itself is being absorbed in the ground. The pasuk speak about that too. So therefore, it has a din of a kli sheni. The pot you're putting on top of it is hot, and the milk is hot. Forget about the milk being hot. Once it's a kli sheni, the laws change. Okay, so it might be hot. It still might be hot, so let us. Okay, but it has a din of a kli sheni. So what's the din of a kli sheni? The din of a kli sheni is okay. It's not have some rule, but it'll be a little bit of an absorption. Okay, even if it would be cold. Completely klishlish, and you put a hot pot on top of it. So what's the din? So when we said by the din of tatogavar that taka the whatever's on the bottom is going to be the overpowering factor. So even if it was cold, it was cold milk, and you're going to put a hot pot on top of it, so it's not going to answer the upper pot. But as we said over there in Simon Sadik Aleph, we're discussing tatogavar. We said that by the time that pot cools off, but it's still going to absorb a little bit. Yeah. So therefore, you're going to have to take kadei klifa from the pot. What's kadei klifa from the pot? The width of the pot itself is the kadei klifa. So therefore, he said, So the kedate is going to become master. The balek is going to absorb a little bit, at least kedate klippa. But tafshel mutter, that tatogaver. But the food inside the pot is going to be okay, tatogaver. This is just a tip for those that are using baby bottles. If you want to heat up a baby bottle on Shabbos, so it says the liquid you can heat up in a klisheni. Okay, so you can take water from the china, put it in a klisheni, and then take your bottle and make sure the outside of the bottle is dry, and you go and you put inside a klisheni. You don't even have to make sure it's dry because the liquid doesn't cook in a klisheni. That's fine. Let's say that doesn't work so well to heat it up. So you can do iri klirishin on top of the baby bottle if it's liquid. Talking about liquid. Yeah. Iri klirishin is mavashal gadei klippah, but it's in a bottle. So what's the gadei klippah? The bottle is gadei klippah. So you cook the bottle. So it's a cooking a bottle. Okay. So in this case, we're going to ask a kadei klippah. The kadei klippah is the width of the kadei itself. But the food inside is going to be okay, tatogover. And we're judging the milk on the bottom as being a klisheni. And you're putting a hot pot on top of a klisheni, so it's going to answer only kadei klippah. So here we got a picture of a klirishin, the milk spilling al gaba karka, and then somebody came along. Yeah, it's still hot, but it's a klisheni, and then he puts a hot pot of Bosor on top. So we say tatogavar, it's still yatzaled this place. Normally you want to say, tatogavar, it's hot. Look, there's steam. They got pictures, steam coming out of it. Yeah, but it's a klisheni. Klisheni ain't a mavashel. So we say tatogavar, and it's not going to cook it to the extent that it's going to answer the food. Okay, it's a hot pot you put on top of it, so it's going to answer kadei klippah. So that first layer over there from the pot is going to be also, you're going to have to kasher it. But the food inside is going to be mutter. So that's the first case of this long Ramah. And now another case of traveling milk.
And second, the hot pot doesn't turn it back into a klirishin if it's still hot.
So if it's, depending on the proportion of milk and the size of the pot, it very well might. The Taz brings down a marshal that also it brings down a person that want to be machmer take as a result of that case, that perhaps the top, but in general, the cloud by tato gavar is if the alien is cham and the tato is kar. So we say tato gavar. But over here, so there's some want to say, so Ramah doesn't say like that, but some don't want to say that it's such a small amount that it's going to be miskaber, that the pot is going to be miskaber and answer it. But certainly the Ramah doesn't hold like that. Now, bikaluach mina kadera rasachas. Case number 2. We have a kiluach, the water is flowing out, it boiled over. The milk pot boiled over. We got milk flowing, a river of milk. Halach al kadera tzanenes. It went for a walk, and it went into a cold pot. Okay, so it flowed into a cold pot. Obviously, this cold pot is fleshik. So, how do we now judge this kiluach? Over in the first case, it was sitting over there on the karka. It wasn't like actively flowing out of the pot anymore. Here is the kiluach. So is it nifsaka kiluach or not nifsaka kiluach? So the Ramah gives both possibilities. So im nifsaka kiluach mina kadera sachas. So if the flow was nifsak, it got cut off from the boiling pot. Kedem shegia elatzainem. Before it reached the cold pot, it's always like a klisheni. And even those who want to be machmer b'chlal on a klisheni, you say over here, the outside of a kededa, many of them are makel also. Even if in general there'd be machmer on a klisheni, but such a case over there with nifsek a kiloch, you treat like a klisheni, but not to the extent of answering anything. Being lay nifsak, and over here we're not going to answer the kededa at all. It's the kededa tzanenes. Over there, we asked the pot because you had a hot pot. Yeah, but over here, if the pot is cold, you can be matter the pot also. Bimla nifsak. However, if it was not nifsak kiluach, then have a keiroi. It's considered to be iroi. Vakedera tzenenes nesara. And then the cold pot is going to become aser. If in the place where it touched the cold pot, the milk was still yatzaledis bay. However, how much is it going to aser? No, how much is it going to aser? Klei klipa, exactly. So what's going to be the din? What's going to be with the meat inside the pot? No problem. Kosher. The only problem is going to be the iri asked the pot klei klipa. So the food which is inside the cold pot is going to be okay. Then iri also rakadei klipa. Yeah, so they're going to ask klei klipa. So therefore, what's it going to be with that pot? You're going to let it sit 24 hours. You're going to pour boiling water on the outside of the pot because only ask klei klipa. You don't have to put in boiling water and do a proper agulus kalim on it. You just do a iri klirishon on the outside. If, however, the pot was hot, so this was a klirishon, and now what happened? Now the hot milk flowed out of the milk pot and it flowed into a hot flesh pot. And that's even if it's not al gabesh, that it's just tuldas aish. It was off the fire. And even more so if it's sitting on the fire. See, the way people used to cook, when you had these old style ovens, you'd have on one side of the oven somebody cooking milk, on the other side something fleshik. They're doing liban gomer on the whole thing the whole time. Anyway, there's wood there, different things to cooking. I heard in Morocco that the Arabs and the Jews used to use the same oven. There'd be one oven on the street. So there was no problem. So they would make the velas, their halal over there, and then the Yidden would come along and kasher it. They take some wood, put on and make a liban. It wasn't like kashering ovens today. It was very simple in the kashering ovens, like kashering a pizza oven, a matzah oven, something, because you get a full over there. So you take some coals and you put it on and you make a liban. Fine. Erste even. Right? So if it's ala eish, I feel like hiluch utzain and hakolaser, the tatog gava. So even if the milk was cold, but since the fleshka pot was hot, tatog gava. So it's like pouring something cold into something hot. The kuliyasr, and that's a dinner tatog gava. Commercial barley, 7 sadik aleph. When we learned about tatog gava, so if you have something cold falling into something hot, so it asks the whole thing, because tatog gava. So therefore, that's like a third case in the Ramah. The first case in the Ramah was like Abakarka. The second case was that we have on the top of this page that it overflowed into a Gederet Senenes. And within that, we had Nifsak Kiluch, not Nifsak Kiluch. And then we have the case that the Gederet was a Gederet Chama. And then we say Tatagover. The Shaila is, why is it called Tatagover? Aren't they next to each other? I mean, they're on the same level, basically. Yeah, so the water was flowing, okay, and maybe there's a little bit on an incline, otherwise how is it flowing? Whatever the case is, they're basically next to each other. So why is this tatogava? It doesn't really seem to be tata. It didn't fall on it. It didn't fall on it from the top. It was next to it. So the emes is, the Taz wants to be done, all of these cases, like two things which are next to each other. When you have things which are next to each other, one is hot and one is cold, or they're both hot, there's different klolim. Generally, they cliffa. Okay, if they're next to each other, we don't say tatagover if they're mamish right next to each other. But over here it says clear that Amos is tatagover. The shaila is why. So here we have the case of the picture. I don't know what happened to the picture. Yeah, so it flowed. So why? Because it's tatagover. So if nisaka kiloch, you look like a cliche. Even better than a cliche, we're not going to answer it at all. If it was loy nifsak kiloch, asir also vatavshamut. You answer the kedera, you answer the keli. How much are you going to answer? You're going to answer kedei klipa, but the food inside is okay. It was protected kedei klipa. Okay. The shaila is, how do we call this the sort of shach? The Shach wants to say that since it was sitting in its place previously, the Shach brings a few asberim, but one asber at least is that the fact that it's sitting stationary, that itself also makes it tator. Tator gover. It just shows if you hold your ground, you don't know tator gover. Even it's a dir b'tachtenim is tator gover. Yeah. So it's on the bottom. It's not physically. So the word of tatagover according to this understanding, is not the geography, which is higher than the other, which is on top and which is on the bottom. It's also which has its chazaka, which is it in its place. So now we have a sikum. I should probably make it myself, but they should have a slide like this at the end of each shir. It's very good sikum of everything we learned. Okay, what do we learn today? So short summary of what we learned. First of all, we had the din, the tipus chalav, which fell on the kedera. So since we pass them like the smak, who differentiates between negarative and shalek negarative. So we say like this: if it's not for negarative, hatav shel motek yeshishim asir tzorach hagola. So we paskin certainly lechatchil like the shach. Taz wants to say you don't really need to kasher it except for marasayan. Everybody agrees certainly lechatchil you need to kasher it. For some reason you couldn't kasher it as kashayla. But in general, we pass like the shach. Ma says you have to kasher it. So the food inside, as long as there's shishim. If there's no shishim, then yendik, no, it's all asr. But if there is shishim, so then the tafshil is mutter, and the pat you have to kasher. Now let's case number 2. Let's say the milk fell sholei keneged ha'reitiv. So then we had sif hey vav and zayin. So on sif hey lefi. Lefi minhag HaShulchan Aruch, which is sif zayin hakol neser. It becomes asr, even the food. Lefi das hashach nit l'tzanis atafshul ha'reisa. Paskin like the maroi, the Ashkenaz, and as we mentioned, many among Nixfar too. Even though they normally might paskin like the machaber, but it's not really a psak from the going against the machaber either. So therefore, the matter the food, but you first let it cool off before you pour it out. And that was the difference. It was fell to connect a rative, so then you pour it out as soon as possible. First, like connect a rative to wait till it cools. And then we had subsime. You can pour it out right away if it's b'shas hatchag. What's with the kisu kadeira? So the kisu kadeira fell on the cover, so they're passing like the taz. Basically, if it's midiraisa, then we need shishim pamim shishim, like the calculation Marami Rottenberg, 3,600 times or 3,660 according to the diuk of the shach. And if this is the rabbanim, it's enough to have shishim keneged chalav. And then if it was nishpach, chalav shetach asir raseach. So that was in the first case where it fell on Gaba Karka. It fell on Gaba Karka, so it was mamish, clearly a tachton. The other cases, the shach is explaining why it was be called a tatogavar, although the taz doesn't seem happy with that. He wants to call them more next to each other, but. So if it was tachasir asechim asir chunach cholav, so if you put the pot on top of the cholav, hasir aser b'tav shel mutter. So then the sear, the hot pot, became aser. Could they clip at least? But the tafshel inside is okay. Meaning cholav egil the sear, but if it was just running into it from the side, then asir aser b'tzarach shishim b'tafshel keneged cholav. But since in that case, if the pot was hot, we say tatogavar, and therefore it heated up the milk. And therefore, you're going to need shishim. Otherwise, the food itself is also going to become asr. So, any questions? Oh, I wasn't sure we were going to cover it all. It looks like we did. We had a few people treat us a kelim along the way, but the ruba, we have a sara sheyeshvim veiskim potato and covered your bestamos. Any questions or comments? Lot of chaimer, 2.5 hours of listening. If there's, I think 2.5 hours of listening is even more difficult than 2.5 hours of talking. But the only thing is, I know I'm talking, but you don't always know if you're listening because to listen. I don't think it's how minds don't work like that. So this whole misgaris over here is. Okay, but you have a recording. You can always listen over to it, and I would suggest doing so. But you should also certainly read the Chayveres. You should learn Shachatas too. But the very minimum to get the dinim from the Chaveris. A lot of important dinim over here. I wasn't able to do it, but you have, as I mentioned, this in Tzaddik base, we have all Piskei dinim, Arichas, and we have some psukim with the Tzemach Tzedek. We'll put it ran out of time. Maybe hopefully when we do the Sikum, when we finish Tzaddik Zion, we're going to have a couple of shiurim of review. So maybe we'll just concentrate on the Piskei dinim, then we'll bring down all the relevant psukim. Any questions? Okay. Gute Nacht, Rabbi Sei. Sei gesund und stark. Kol Tuv.